Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Nika Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Sacred Morphine Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. As he exhaled, his breath turned to vapor in the cold air. He felt a drop of sweat fall along the back of his neck, and the sun on the top of the sky blazed with its heat. He cursed the weird spring temperatures. Izuku snuggled into his scarf as he took in what was in front of him. UA's campus was strangely quiet, with most of the students away with their families to spend their last days of spring break before starting the year. Izuku stood in front of the door of the Teachers Heights Alliance dorm building, the place he would call home for the whole year. It was well into noon when he arrived at UA's campus, which was unusual for him, as he personally preferred taking late-night shifts. But when Mika-san asked, more like begged, him to take her midday shift, he just couldn't say no. Yes, the extra money was an incentive, but also, Mika's little son was sick, and she didn't have anyone she trusted enough to take care of him. Izuku almost felt bad for arriving in his work clothes, which were plain dark blue scrubs with a white compression shirt under them. He had his trusty white sneakers, which had helped him stay on his feet for long shifts since he was a resident. His yellow backpack hung from his right shoulder, a less beat-up version of his favorite bag since high school, and he had a duffel bag hanging from his other shoulder, with the few items that were left in his overall, empty apartment. Thankfully, most of his stuff was already sent to his new apartment just before spring break, so he just brought what was left. He let out a sigh and opened the door, finding a homey common area that connected to a dining area. Izuku stood in silence, taking a few minutes to take in the view of the common area. It looked like people actually lived there, which was nice and comforting. There were some throw blankets on the sofa and some board games piled up next to the TV dresser. "Oh, you're that new teacher Nedzu was talkin' 'bout, ain't ya?" said a voice from the hallway that connected the floor-level apartments and the elevator. As Izuku looked up, he took in the man's appearance. He was tall with dark caramel skin, the color rich and deep, complementing the blue dreadlocks that cascaded over his shoulders. His hazel eyes were sharp, piercing beneath the brim of his hat, and a stub of beard outlined his strong jaw, adding to the ruggedness of his appearance. Izuku smiled nervously and nodded, adjusting the duffel bag on his shoulder. "Yes, sir, that's me." He didn't trust his voice to speak more than that because, oh my god, that's Snipe. The man tips his hat back slightly, a warm grin forming on his face. "Name's Mizushima Masaki, though most folks around here just call me Snipe." He extends his hand for a handshake. "Midoriya Izuku, nice to meet you." He shakes Snipe's hand firmly. "It's an honor to be here. I'll be teaching first aid this year." "Mighty fine to meet ya, Izuku. Heard good things 'bout you from Nedzu." He gives a reassuring pat on Izuku's shoulder. "If you need anything while settlin' in, just holler." "Thank you, I appreciate it." Izuku made his way to the elevators, glancing around the quiet hallway. His thoughts were a whirlwind of anticipation and nerves. Just as he was about to step into the elevator, he noticed a familiar figure coming towards the elevator to All Might, in his civilian clothes and thinner than he remembered. Izuku's heart skipped a beat, recognizing his role model from when he was a kid. Now, next to him in an elevator, stood the man he had admired the most all his life. Summoning his courage, Izuku faced the taller man. "Excuse me, All Might, sir," he called out, trying to catch his attention. Yagi looked down, his expression a mix of curiosity and caution. "Yes? How can I help you?" Izuku took a deep breath. "Do you remember me?" "Midoriya Izuku. I asked you if I could be a hero when I was 12, and you told me my quirk was more suited for a doctor." He tried to smile, but because of the nerves, he could only muster a small grin. Toshinori's eyes widened slightly, and an uneasy look crossed his face. I think I do recall a conversation like that. I'm sorry, I didn't expect you to dash," he trailed off, unsure of what Izuku's response might be. Izuku, noticing the discomfort, offered a reassuring smile, feeling a lot calmer. "Please don't worry. I'm not here to criticize you. In fact, I wanted to thank you." The taller man blinked, clearly taken aback. "Thank me?" The elevator arrived at Izuku's floor, the third floor, and to continue the small conversation, Izuku stood on the floor between the sliding doors. "Yes," Izuku nodded earnestly. "At the time, I was disappointed, but you were right. My quirk was indeed best suited for medicine, and I'm now a surgeon. I've never been happier with my career decision. I found my own way to be a hero, helping people in a different way." Yagi's expression softened, relief washing over him. "I'm glad to hear that. It's always a bit nerve-wracking, wondering how our advice impacts others." Izuku's smile widened, and he let out a small giggle. It was good advice. It helped me find my path. And now, I'm here as a teacher, hoping to make a difference in my own way. The older man's face brightened with a genuine smile. Well, that's wonderful to hear, Izuku. I'm sure you'll do great. If you need anything or just want to chat, feel free to reach out. Izuku nodded. Thank you, All Might, sir. I'll keep that in mind. Please, my name is Toshinori Yagi, we're co-workers now, my boy. The man smiled and Izuku stood away from the doors, letting the elevator leave with a small wave and a smile. Izuku settled into his new apartment, feeling the unfamiliar quiet of the building wrap around him. It had been years since he lived in a place that felt so empty. His small apartment that he had since he moved on his own while in college was so homey and comforting. Looking at blank walls and empty furniture felt weird. The apartment was modest but cozy. It felt a little cramped with boxes around and suitcases on the floor. The walls were still bare, but so was the rest of the apartment. He left his work backpack and duffel bag on the dresser in the bedroom, making his way to the small living room dining area. His first mission of the day was to unpack the boxes on the floor. Once the boxes were empty and the kitchen was filled with his appliances, the bathroom was packed, and the furniture held his belongings, he moved to the suitcases, taking the two of them to the bedroom. Izuku refolded his clothes before placing them in the dresser, choosing to hang his work clothes on the hanger inside the wardrobe. He emptied both suitcases and placed them under the bed frame of the double bed. There were some boxes in the bedroom too, one with the bedding set he bought because he had a smaller mattress back at his old apartment. He made the bed, spreading the cloud-like comforter over the light blue bedsheets and placing 2 throw pillows and a bed runner his mother made for him when she was learning how to knit. He opened his duffel bag and started unpacking the few things he put in there, pulling out items and setting them aside carefully. As he unpacked, he came across a worn childhood photo, the edges slightly frayed from being handled too many times. He sat down on the bed, turning the picture over in his hands. It was a picture of him and Katsuki from when the young blonde was a toddler, standing next to each other. Katsuki was wearing his kindergarten uniform, while Izuku was wearing his high school uniform. They were both smiling, the blonde holding onto Izuku's uniform jacket. Izuku found himself smiling at the photo, the memory of that day flooding his mind. Memories he holds so close to his heart of the boy he considers his little brother. He wondered how Katsuki was doing now. They hadn't seen each other in a while, but he knew Katsuki was also starting his 3rd year at UA, likely training hard and continuing to push himself to be the best hero he could be. And Izuku was glad he had the opportunity to add to his education now that he was a teacher at UA. Sighing softly, Izuku placed the photo on his desk, where it could remind him of both the past and how far he had come. He'll buy a nice frame for it tomorrow. He continued unpacking, carefully arranging his belongings. There were small pieces of his old life scattered across the room, now photos of friends and family, one All Might figurine, his all-time favorite one, that he had never quite outgrown, and medical textbooks stacked neatly on a bookshelf. As he was adjusting a photo of him and his mom, there was a loud knock on the door. Izuku jumped slightly before composing himself. He paced through the small apartment and opened the door to find Present Mike, oh my god, standing there, a huge grin plastered across his face. He was wearing jeans, a white shirt, and a leather jacket. He looked so cool. And he had his hair tied into a lazy bun. Yo, yo, yo. Welcome, man. Snipe told me you're the new teacher, my name's Yamada Hizashi. Present Mike greeted Izuku with his signature enthusiasm, his voice loud enough to be heard by the entire building. Izuku chuckled nervously and scratched the back of his neck. Thank you, Yamada-san. It's nice to be here. Please, call me Hizashi. Present Mike waved a hand. We're all on the same team, yeah? So no need to be formal with me. All right. Hizashi, Izuku said, finding it weird to be on a first-name basis with someone he, just met and maybe admired when he was a teen. Present Mike took a quick glance over Izuku's shoulder into the apartment, nodding approvingly at the small touches that made the space feel lived in. I see you're all settled in, do you need help with anything? I'm mostly settled in. Just trying to make it feel more like home, Izuku admitted. But I appreciate the offer. Good to hear, good to hear. We're all pretty close-knit around here, so don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. Seriously. Hizashi's tone was genuine, and Izuku felt a sense of warmth in his words. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you. Here, give me your number, I'll add you to the teacher's group chat, said Hizashi handing his phone over to Izuku. The Contacts app opened into a new contact page. Izuku typed in his phone number and added a contact with his name into FING Present Mix personal phone. If he had been a teen, he'd probably be on the floor, his mouth foaming. He handed back the cell phone to its owner, hearing a ping from his phone, which he left in the bedroom just a minute later. Anyway, I won't take up too much of your time. Just wanted to stop by and welcome you to the team. We've got a staff meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in the conference room next to Nedzu's office, so I'll see you then, informed the loud blonde, putting his phone away inside his pocket. Got it. I'll be there. With one final grin and a wave, President Mike left. Izuku stood in the quiet again, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He was really here, at UA, as a teacher. It felt surreal. After a quick run to the grocery shop, seeing that the fridge and the pantry were empty, he cooked himself something simple for dinner. Izuku grabbed his phone and opened the message app. Hisashi had added him to the group chat with the other teachers. He clicked it open, reading the latest messages. +81 XXXXXXXX added you to the office, UA edition. Hisashi, welcome to the team, at Izuku Midoriya. Hisashi had tagged him with a string of party emojis, and immediately several other staff members chimed in with greetings. As the night wore on, Izuku's mind wandered to his lesson planning. He went to the bedroom to retrieve a folder he had been filling with papers and documents since he'd been hired, as well as a pencil case. The folder is filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and carefully thought-out ideas for how to structure his course. Teaching, in general, was something he'd wanted to do for a long time, and now that it was real, he wanted to live up to his own expectations. Izuku flipped through the pages of his syllabus, adding a yellow post-it reminding him to print it out before classes start to give it to his students, and reviewing the lesson plans he'd drafted over the last few weeks. His first aid class was going to cover a lot of ground, not just the basics, but more advanced techniques that could help heroes in real-world situations. He planned on incorporating real-life case studies from his job at the hospital, hoping to give the students insights into the medical emergencies they might face as heroes. He had a few case files from his days as a resident tucked into the back of the folder. The simpler cases were highlighted with pink post-its while the more complex ones were highlighted with orange ones. One in particular stood out, a young hero in training who had suffered multiple fractures on his arms during a rescue mission. Izuku remembered working on that case vividly, not only because it was his first case as a lead surgeon but also because it gave him the opportunity to work alongside Recovery Girl. He grabbed the nearest pen and started jotting down ideas for interactive lessons. He wanted his students to be engaged not just in theory but in hands-on practice. He planned to have them practice CPR, wound dressing, and even some triage work. Izuku made a mental note to ask Nedzu if UA had some dummies available for the class. Izuku returned to the dining table, his focus now shifting to a second folder with a stack of paperwork Nedzu had given him in the quick visit he paid the Chimera when he arrived to campus earlier in the day. Most of it was administrative schedules, rules, some paperwork about his official position, and information about the staff meeting in the morning. As he skimmed through the materials, he found a brief description of the topic, safety review and teaching policies for the hero course. He had to admit, he was a little nervous. Being a surgeon was one thing, but teaching young heroes in training? That was a whole new challenge. He wasn't just responsible for their physical health anymore, he had to mentor and guide them as future heroes. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders. But he also felt determined. He was ready for this. He had always admired the heroes who shaped his life, and now it was his turn to help shape the lives of others. He didn't have a flashy quirk or combat skills, but he had knowledge that could save lives in a different way. As the evening deepened into night, Izuku found himself staring out the window at the darkening sky. The stars were starting to peek through. It felt peaceful. Izuku stretched out his arms and let out a soft sigh of contentment. Strangely, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Tucking away his papers for the night, he glanced once more at his phone. It was quite late. With a heart full of warmth, he finished his dinner, washed up, and got ready for bed. He lay down, staring at the ceiling, already planning out how he would organize his day. The next day, Izuku wakes up energized, excitement running through his veins. It's early when he steps in the shower and rinses off the tension on his shoulders. Once in his bedroom, in a half-panic, he chose what to wear. Classes hadn't started yet, so there wasn't a need to be professional, but he was about to have a meeting with his boss and his coworkers. He needed to make a good first impression. After some minutes of panicking, he settled on some black slacks, a white t-shirt and a beige knitted jumper. He applied some curl cream to his hair and scrunched it, defining his damp curls, and finally, he tied on some black dress sneakers. With some minutes to spare, he grabbed his class folder, his phone, and his keys and left the apartment. Izuku arrived at UA with time to spare, his nerves tingling with a mix of excitement and anticipation. The morning air was crisp, and the campus, though mostly quiet, hummed with an energy that only a school for heroes could possess. He made his way to the conference room, his footsteps echoing softly in the long hallway. The conference room where the meeting was to be held was located on the second floor, just down the hall from the principal's office. As Izuku stepped inside, he was struck by the room's professional atmosphere. The space was designed for serious discussions, with a long, polished, U-shaped wooden table at the center, surrounded by black chairs. Large windows on one side of the room let in plenty of natural light, giving the space an airy, open feel. The walls were adorned with framed photos of past UA graduates and staff, each capturing moments of triumph and pride. Alongside them were several charts and diagrams related to hero training strategies and educational goals. In the far corner, a projector was set up, ready for presentations, and a clean whiteboard with some dry erase markers. In the opposite corner was a wooden table with a coffee maker and a tray with cups, spoons, and another tray with sugar and other things to put in their coffee. A few teachers were already seated, chatting in low voices as they sipped on their morning coffee. "Izuku, good to see you again," Yamada Hizashi called out as he entered the room, his trademark smile wide and welcoming. "Ready for the meeting?" Izuku smiled back, feeling a little more at ease. "Good morning, Hizashi." "Yes, I'm excited to get started." God, was it hard to call the hero by his given name. It felt weird. Before he could say more, another teacher approached, his massive, stone-like body immediately catching Izuku's attention. It was Cementos. "Midoriya-san, correct?" Cementos greeted, his voice deep but gentle. "I've heard a lot about you from Yamada-san. Welcome to UA." "Thank you, Cementos-san," Izuku replied with a respectful bow. "It's an honor to be here." Cementos nodded, his stony face giving away a hint of a smile. Izuku set his folder on the table next to where Hizashi was seated and beelined to the coffee table. He grabbed one of the crisp white cups and filled it with coffee from the pot. He added some creamer and sugar and went to the table again. More teachers filtered into the room, some familiar faces and others new to Izuku. Among them was a tall man with unkempt black hair and dark circles under his eyes. Izuku recognized him instantly, though it took him a moment to place the face. Eraserhead was an underground hero. Aside from a few times he saw him in the hospital, interviewing victims of villain attacks, or even escorting wounded criminals, Izuku didn't know much about him other than his hero name. It was unexpected to see him here, teaching at UA, of all places, but it kind of made sense since he is able to give the students another view on heroics. Izuku couldn't help but be curious. What could have led an underground hero like Eraserhead to take up teaching? The question lingered in his mind as he observed him from across the room. Despite his disheveled appearance and the weariness in his posture, there was an undeniable intensity in his presence. "All right, everyone, let's get started," a sweet yet serious voice cut through the chatter, drawing everyone's attention to the head of the table. Nedzu, UA's principal, had entered the room, his small frame contrasting sharply with the seriousness of the occasion. Despite his size, Nedzu's voice was loud, and the room fell silent as he began the meeting. "Before we dive into the details, I'd like to formally introduce Midoriya Izuku, who will be joining us as the teacher for the first aid class for the third-year heroics students," Nizu announced, motioning towards Izuku. "He's also a practicing surgeon, so much like most of you are still practicing pro-heroes, he will be harder to reach out to outside school hours. We're very fortunate to have someone of his expertise on board." The staff murmured in approval, and a few nodded appreciatively. Izuku gave a small smile, standing to address the room. "Thank you, Principal Nizu. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited to contribute to UA and help train the next generation of heroes." He paused, taking a breath before continuing. "I'll be maintaining my shifts at Muzutafu General Hospital, though I've adjusted my schedule to only cover night shifts, so I'll be available here during the day." "That's quite the workload," a voice commented from the far end of the table. It was Eraserhead, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp as they assessed Izuku. "Are you sure you can handle both roles without compromising on either?" Izuku met Aizawa's dark, tired eyes. "I wouldn't have taken on this responsibility if I wasn't confident in my ability to manage both." Aizawa studied him for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod, seemingly satisfied with the answer. The conversation shifted as Nizu moved on to other agenda items, discussing the upcoming school year and the specific roles each teacher would play. But Izuku's mind kept drifting back to Aizawa, intrigued by the man's presence and the subtle challenge in his words. As the meeting continued, Izuku found himself more attuned to the dynamics of the staff. A few of them had been at the school for a long time, so they had routines and strong ideas about how things should be done. Some were more recent, still getting established, but they all appeared to share the same objective of developing and preparing the following generation of heroes. When the meeting finally concluded, the teachers dispersed, some lingering to chat while others quickly exited to prepare for their day. Izuku gathered his things, his mind buzzing with everything he had learned. As he prepared to leave, he caught a glimpse of Eraserhead approaching him. "Aizawa Shouta," he said in his groggy voice and tired demeanor, extending his hand for Izuku to shake. Confused by the sudden introduction, he shook the man's hand and mumbled his own. Aizawa nodded and headed towards the door, his movements slow and deliberate, as if weighed down by invisible burdens. Just as he was about to leave, Hisashi walked over with his usual energetic smile. "Hey, Izuku. Got a minute? I can show you to the teacher's lounge." Izuku nodded gratefully. "That would be great, thank you." As they left the conference room and made their way down the hall, Hisashi chatted easily about the school, sharing snippets of information about the other teachers and the students. His friendly demeanor helped Izuku feel more at ease. They soon arrived at a door with a small plaque that read Teacher's Lounge. Hisashi pushed the door open, and they stepped inside. The lounge was a stark contrast to the formal atmosphere of the conference room. The space was cozy and welcoming, designed with comfort in mind. Several desks were arranged in 2 lines, facing each other, with matching office chairs. Along one wall was a long table with a coffee maker, a microwave, and a small fridge, stocked with essentials like milk, sugar, and a variety of snacks. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the room, adding to the relaxed atmosphere. The opposite wall was lined with bookshelves filled with various teaching materials, hero manuals, and even some leisure reading. There were also several photographs pinned to a board, pictures of past alumni, snapshots from school events, and a few pieces of student-made artwork, adding a personal touch to the room. The remaining wall was filled with floor-to-ceiling windows, giving the room bright natural lighting. Hisashi led Izuku to a small desk tucked in a corner. "This is your spot," he said, gesturing to the desk, which was already stocked with a few essentials: a stack of blank notepads, some pens, and a small desk lamp. "Thank you," Izuku said, setting his folder down on the desk. He appreciated the setup. It was simple but functional, just what he needed. The large window next to the desk offered a view of the school's courtyard. "This lounge is where most of us come to unwind between classes, plan our lectures, or just hang out, you know," Hisashi explained, leaning against the edge of the desk. "You'll find it's a good place to catch your breath and maybe even get some advice if you ever need it." Izuku nodded, taking in the room's relaxed vibe. "It's nice, feels like a good place to recharge." "Exactly," Hisashi agreed with a grin. "Anyway, I'm sure you'll settle in just fine. If you ever need anything, you have my number." He gave Izuku a friendly pat on the back before heading towards the door. "Catch you later, Izuku." Izuku watched as Hisashi left, feeling a bit more settled in his new environment. He spent a few moments making a mental note of the stuff he'll need to buy to stock his desk. Once he arrived at his apartment, he grabbed his wallet and walked to the nearest stationery shop. He bought a blank notebook, maybe 2, but hey, you never have enough blank notebooks, some highlighters and post-its and other office supplies, like staples and paperclips. The rest of the day passed quickly, with Izuku familiarizing himself with the school's layout and getting to know some of the other staff members. Before he knew it, the afternoon had turned to evening. After setting up his desk at the teacher's lounge, he arrived once again at his apartment and started to get ready for work. Slipping into the restroom for a quick shower, he applied curl cream to his hair and wrapped a towel around his hips. He opened his wardrobe and quickly changed into his scrubs, the familiar dark green fabric fitting snugly against his skin, and he added a white, long-sleeved compression shirt underneath for added warmth. As he looked in the mirror, he couldn't help but smile at his reflection. UA was filled with the energy and vibrancy of young students. The hospital was a different world, intense, sterile, and frequently fraught with decisions that involve people's lives. Izuku sighed softly, placing a hand on his forehead, completely avoiding touching his curls. He didn't want to ruin them. He knew that balancing both jobs would be challenging, but well, when has he said no to a good challenge? Before heading out, he decided to cook something for dinner. He settled on pasta, and he made some extra that he put in a container to reheat the next day. After enjoying his simple yet satisfying dinner, Izuku cleaned up the kitchen, wiping down the counters and washing the dishes with practiced efficiency. He glanced at the clock on the microwave. It was nearing 8:30 p.m., giving him just enough time to gather his work bag and head to the hospital for his 9 p.m. shift. Back in his bedroom, he double-checked the contents of his work bag: his stethoscope in its case, a couple of protein bars, a fully stocked medical kit, a habit he got during his residency, his planner, and a newly added notebook where he planned to write down important notes and observations during his shifts that might be useful for his classes. Satisfied that he had everything he needed, Izuku slipped on his white coat and ID badge and made his way out of the apartment, locking the door behind him. The evening air was cool and refreshing as he walked through UA's quiet campus towards the staff parking lot, where his car was parked. The campus was now serene under the twilight sky, streetlights casting soft pools of light along the pathways. The drive to Mizurufu General Hospital was smooth, the streets relatively empty at this hour. Izuku enjoyed these moments of solitude, using the drive to mentally prepare himself for the night ahead. Upon arriving at the hospital, Izuku parked in his usual spot and made his way inside, greeted by the familiar antiseptic scent and the low hum of activity that characterized the hospital at all hours. The bright fluorescent lights contrasted sharply with the dim evening outside, instantly switching his mindset into doctor mode. "Evening, Midoriya-san," called out Nurse Sato from the reception desk, offering him a warm smile as he walked past. "Good evening, Sato-san," Izuku replied with a polite nod, returning the smile. He headed to the locker room to store his belongings inside his locker. The night shift team was already assembled in the staff room for the evening briefing. Dr. Takahashi, the senior physician on duty, was reviewing patient charts and assigning duties for the night. "Ah, Midoriya-san, right on time," Dr. Takahashi greeted him as he entered. "We have a few post-op patients in recovery and a couple of minor cases in the ER at the moment. You'll be overseeing Ward B and on-call for any surgical emergencies." "Understood," Izuku replied, accepting the stack of patient files handed to him. He quickly skimmed through them, mentally cataloging the details and noting any potential concerns. As the briefing concluded, the team dispersed to their respective duties. Izuku made his way to Ward B, greeting the nurses and checking in on each patient with meticulous care. The patients were an elderly man recovering from a hip replacement and a young woman who had undergone an appendectomy earlier that day. Izuku moved from room to room, his demeanor professional yet compassionate, taking the time to answer questions and provide reassurance where needed. Hours passed in a steady rhythm. The ward remained calm, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional beeping of monitors and the soft footsteps of the night staff making their rounds. During a brief lull, Izuku found himself at the nurse's station, updating patient charts and sipping on a cup of lukewarm coffee to keep himself alert. "Midoriya-san, you make night shifts look easy," commented Nurse Akiyama, a seasoned nurse with a friendly disposition. She leaned against the counter, stretching her back after a long round. The woman had over 15 years working at Mizurufu General Hospital, and most newer nurses and even doctors went to her for help. Even Izuku when he was just starting. Izuku smiled modestly, setting down his pen. "I think it's the team that makes it manageable. Especially the nurses. You train them so well. Makes my job a lot smoother, too." She chuckled, shaking her head. "Always so humble. But seriously, it's good to have you on nights." "Thank you, Akiyama-san," Izuku replied earnestly. As the night wore on, Izuku continued his rounds, ensuring all was well and attending to minor issues as they arose. Around midnight, a patient in the ER presented with a deep laceration from a kitchen accident, requiring stitches. Izuku handled the procedure deftly, his hands steady and movements precise, his calming voice easing the patient's anxiety throughout. Returning to the ward, he took a moment to rest in the staff lounge, nibbling on one of the protein bars he had packed. His mind wandered briefly to UA, pondering the lesson plans he needed to finalize and the students he would soon be teaching. He considered how his experiences tonight might translate into valuable lessons and real-life scenarios that could prepare his students for the unexpected challenges they might face as heroes. By the time witching hour rolled around, the hospital had settled into a deep quiet, the kind that only occurred in the early hours before dawn. Izuku completed his final rounds, ensuring all his patients were stable and that the incoming day shift would be briefed properly. At 7 a.m., Izuku handed over his duties to the morning team, exchanging brief updates and necessary information. He grabbed his work bag from his locker before heading out into the cool morning air. The drive back to UA was peaceful, the streets nearly empty after the peak hour at 6, and the buildings shining with the soft glow of the morning sun. Despite the fatigue tugging at his body, Izuku felt a sense of fulfillment wash over him. It had been a good night, steady and productive. Parking his car back in the staff lot, he stepped out and took a moment to stretch, inhaling the crisp morning air deeply into his lungs. The sky above was as blue as it could get, just a few clouds obstructing the blue view. As he walked through the quiet campus towards the teacher's dormitory, his footsteps echoed softly against the pavement. The tranquility of the scene was soothing, wrapping around him like a comforting blanket. He looked forward to a few hours of rest before the day began anew. However, as he rounded a corner near the main building, a figure caught his attention. At first glance, it seemed like someone taking an early morning stroll, but as Izuku's eyes adjusted, he realized it was Aizawa, and something was definitely off. Aizawa was leaning heavily against the building's door, his usually stoic face contorted in a grimace of pain. His hero costume was torn in several places, revealing bloodied gashes and bruises beneath. His right arm hung limp at his side, and his steps were unsteady as he attempted to push himself upright. Alarm surged through Izuku, instantly banishing any traces of fatigue. He hurried over, his instincts kicking into overdrive. "Aizawa-san. Are you okay?" Izuku called out, concern lacing his voice as he closed the distance between them. Aizawa looked up, his dark eyes dull with exhaustion and pain. "I'm fine," he muttered, attempting to straighten but failing miserably. Izuku was by his side in an instant, gently but firmly grasping his uninjured arm to support him. "You're clearly not fine. Let me help you." "I don't need," Aizawa began, but his words were cut short by a sharp intake of breath as a fresh wave of pain washed over him. "I don't need your help. Please, let me," Izuku insisted, his voice steady but compassionate. "I'm a doctor, let me take a look at your injuries." For a moment, Aizawa seemed poised to argue, but the combination of pain and exhaustion weakened his resistance. He gave a slight nod, allowing Izuku to guide him into the common room. "Let's sit you down first," Izuku said softly, helping Aizawa lower himself onto a chair with as little discomfort as possible. He quickly assessed the visible injuries: multiple lacerations, signs of deep bruising, and a likely dislocated shoulder. "What happened?" Izuku asked as he placed his work bag on the table next to Aizawa and opened it. "Ran into some trouble on patrol," Aizawa replied tersely, wincing as he shifted slightly. "Nothing I couldn't handle." Izuku's lips pressed into a thin line as he examined a particularly nasty gash along Aizawa's forearm. "Yeah, it looks like you did handle it. These wounds need immediate attention." The green-headed doctor took the medical kit from his bag and placed it on the table, then grabbed his stethoscope from its case and placed it over his shoulders. Aizawa grunted, his gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. "I was going to head to Recovery Girl by noon." "With all due respect, waiting could lead to complications," Izuku replied firmly, his eyes scanning every wound and making a mental plan on what he should treat first. "Let me look at them." Aizawa looked at the medical kit and then his stethoscope, and then back at Izuku, his expression inscrutable. After a brief pause, he relented with a tired sigh. "Fine. Do what you need to do." Izuku offered a reassuring smile before snapping into action. He donned a pair of LTX gloves, put on the earpieces of his stethoscope and approached the wounded man. "I need you to lean forward a bit, can you do that for me?" The man did as he instructed, grunting a little as he leaned forward just a tiny bit. That was enough for Izuku to slide the chest piece of the stethoscope under Aizawa's hero costume, placing it on the bare skin of his back. The hero hissed from the feeling of the cold metal. "I need you to take 3 deep breaths, yeah?" he instructed. Izuku listened to his lungs as Aizawa took deep breaths, moving the stethoscope to listen to different parts. Once he confirmed that there weren't any fluids in the man's lungs, he moved on to the next thing on his mental list. "Okay, there are no fluids in your lungs, now let's take a look at your arm." He touched it lightly and lifted it a bit, but he stopped once he heard the underground hero grunt from the pain. "Your shoulder is dislocated," Izuku stated, meeting Aizawa's gaze. "I can reset it now, but it will hurt." Aizawa's lips quirked in what could have been a dry smirk. "Just do it." "All right. On 3, Izuku instructed, positioning himself carefully. 1.2. He didn't wait for 3, swiftly and smoothly maneuvering Aizawa's arm back into place with a practiced motion. Aizawa gasped sharply, his body tensing before he exhaled slowly, some of the tension easing from his frame as the joint settled back properly. "Sorry for the surprise," Izuku said, offering an apologetic smile. "It's usually better to do it quickly." Aizawa rolled his shoulder experimentally, a hint of relief crossing his features. "No, that was good. Thanks." Izuku checked that off his mental list and assessed the rest. There was a cut just above his brow that was bleeding into the man's eye, which he kept closed, probably to keep the blood out of his eyeball. Then there was another cut on his left forearm, that was bleeding slowly but steadily. "You have some cuts that I'd like to take a look at. I can sew you up if you want," said the surgeon, meeting the hero's gaze. "Okay," said the hero. Izuku noted that his hands were trembling, and he winced in pain every few moments. He hesitated briefly before speaking. "I have a quirk that can help alleviate your pain temporarily. Would you like me to use it?" Aizawa raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What is it?" "It's called morphine. I can induce a numbing effect by touch, quite like anesthesia," Izuku explained. "It's similar to how morphine works, but without the side effects. It will help ease the pain while I sew you up," explained Izuku as he took off one of his gloves, showing Aizawa how his fingertips let out a soft greenish light as he activated his quirk. Aizawa seemed to weigh the information before giving a short nod. "Go ahead." Izuku shifted closer, placing his hand gently over Aizawa's forehead, avoiding the injured brow. Closing his eyes, he concentrated, channeling his quirk carefully through the man's body. A soft warmth emanated from his palm, spreading through Aizawa's head and radiating downward. The tension in Aizawa's muscles visibly eased, his breathing becoming steadier as the pain dulled. "How does that feel?" Izuku asked, opening his eyes to observe Aizawa's reaction. Aizawa visibly relaxed under Izuku's quirk, a hint of surprise in his voice as he replied, "Better. Much better." Relief washed over Izuku, and he allowed himself a small smile. "Good. The effect should last a few hours, enough time for me to proceed and for you to rest afterward." Aizawa regarded him for a moment, his dark eyes studying Izuku. "You're quite efficient." The surgeon put on a new glove and proceeded to clean up Aizawa's wounds with gauze and some antiseptic solution. The hero didn't complain. "Years of practice," Izuku replied modestly, beginning to take out packets with sterilized elements. He also put on a face mask to ensure the sterile environment. The cut on his right brow was shallow but jagged, with the skin split open. His left forearm had a deeper, longer gash, both wounds still dripping blood despite his quirk's numbing effect. Aizawa's expression was stoic, his dark eyes focused somewhere beyond the ceiling, but Izuku could see the tension in his jaw and the way his body remained stiff even though pain was no longer a concern. With a practiced movement, Izuku opened the sterile pack containing the sutures, needle, and needle holder. He laid them out neatly on some surgical drape on the table. "Let me tell you, you will still feel the needle on your skin, it would not hurt, it'll just be weird," explained the young doctor. He then heard the hero hum. "All right, I'm going to start stitching," Izuku murmured. He reached for the needle, his fingers curling around the handle of the needle holder with a practiced grip. He carefully threaded the suture through the needle's eye, his hands moving on autopilot. He began with the cut on Aizawa's brow. Holding the needle holder in one hand and the forceps in the other, Izuku carefully aligned the needle with the skin at the edge of the wound. The curved needle pierced the skin smoothly, slipping through the tissue with only a slight resistance. Izuku pulled the suture through until only a small tail remained, then looped the needle around again to create a secure knot. The skin pulled together, the edges of the wound aligning perfectly as Izuku made his first stitch. He paid attention to Aizawa's face as he made a slight wince but didn't complain. "You were right, it does feel weird." Izuku couldn't help but giggle slightly, though it came muffled by the face mask. The second stitch followed, then the third, each one placed with practiced precision. Izuku's concentration was absolute, his world narrowing to the task at hand. Aizawa remained silent, his eyes half closed as he allowed Izuku to work. The needle slipped through the skin again and again, the suture drawing the wound closed, until finally, the cut on Aizawa's brow was sealed. Izuku tied off the last stitch, using the surgical scissors to snip the excess thread before carefully wiping away the small beads of blood that had welled up along the seam. "One down," Izuku said. He allowed himself a brief moment to check the wound, ensuring that the stitches were tight but not too constricting and the skin neatly aligned. Satisfied, he turned his attention to the cut on Aizawa's arm. This wound would take more time. It was deeper, and the edges weren't as clean. Izuku adjusted his grip on the needle holder, then began the delicate process of stitching the torn flesh back together. He used the forceps to hold the skin steady as he guided the needle through, the suture gliding through the tissue with each careful motion. Aizawa's arm was heavier, the arm hung with the weight of dense muscle under the skin. He placed each stitch with the same care, pulling the wound closed one thread at a time. The silence in the room was comforting, broken only by the faint sound of the suture sliding through skin and the occasional snip of the scissors as Izuku trimmed the thread after each knot. He worked steadily, the wound gradually closing under his careful hands. The skin on Aizawa's arm was tougher, and the stitches needed to be closer together to ensure that the wound wouldn't reopen. Izuku's eyes flicked up to Aizawa's face occasionally, checking for any sign of discomfort, but the man remained stoic, his gaze still fixed on the ceiling. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only a matter of minutes, Izuku placed the last stitch. He tied off the suture, then used the scissors to cut the thread. He set the needle holder down and tapped the wound clean one last time, ensuring that no blood had seeped through the stitches. The cut on Aizawa's arm was now a neat line, held together by the tiny black knots of the sutures. Izuku leaned back slightly, surveying his work. Both wounds were closed, and the skin pulled together with precision. He reached for the wound dressing, an adhesive bandage that he gently placed over the cut on Aizawa's brow. Then he wrapped his forearm with a long bandage that he secured with some medical tape. "There, all done," Izuku said softly, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. He removed his gloves, the snap of LTX echoing in the room as he discarded them into a nearby waste bin, as well as the packages of the sterile objects. He looked at Aizawa, who finally met his gaze. "How much do I owe you?" asked the underground hero as he stood up from the chair, looking at Izuku with his signature stoic face. "What? No, you don't owe me anything, said Izuku, still on autopilot. Can you make it back to your apartment, or would you like some assistance? Izuku offered, concern evident in his tone. No, you must accept something, you just wasted a lot of resources, that I'm guessing came from your own pocket, on me, insisted the hero. Aizawa-san, you don't owe me anything, you needed help, so I helped, said the young surgeon as he packed his medical kit back into his work bag. I'm afraid I don't follow, why would you help me if you're not going to accept anything in return, asked Shouta, his tired eyes looking at Izuku with slight concern. I helped you because I'm a doctor, and you were wounded, I was not going to leave you there hurting if I can do something to change that. Now his work bag hangs on his shoulder, and he eyed the man with confusion. Why was Aizawa so worked up on giving something in return? So you help me because you can? Are you bragging or something? Aizawa's tone was becoming more frustrated. I'm sorry, I might have not explained my point well. Let's put it like this, you're a hero, right? You help people, and you don't ask for anything in return to the people you save. Well, it's kind of the same for me. Doing this is my own way of being a hero. Also, we're coworkers, if we don't help each other, then who will, explained the freckled man with a sincere smile. His emerald eyes connected with Aizawa's raven ones. Oh, K, he hesitated. Thank you, Midoriya. Izuku knew that tone, that hesitancy. He understood. But at the same time, he appreciated the gratitude from the hero. Anytime, Aizawa-san. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need help. Drop the san, I'm not that old, said the hero, eyeing the young surgeon. If he had to guess, Izuku was just a few years younger. Okay, answered Izuku, smile still present on his freckled face. Aizawa gave a slight nod before turning to make his way towards the elevator, his steps more stable now. Izuku watched him go for a moment, ensuring he was moving comfortably, before heading towards his own apartment. He chose the stairs this time to burn some energy. Unlocking the door to his apartment, Izuku entered the quiet space, setting his bag down and kicking off his shoes. The sky outside was bright, the birds chirping. He relaxed as he remembered that classes started the next day, but for now, rest beckoned. As he collapsed onto his bed, still in his scrubs, Izuku's thoughts lingered on the night's events. A small smile played on his lips as he closed his eyes, sleep pulling him under swiftly. The sun is up in the sky and the birds are singing their morning songs when Izuku arrives at his apartment after his shift. He drops his work bag on the bed and leaves his medical ID next to it, walking to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. He is wearing burgundy scrubs this time, with a white long-sleeved compression shirt underneath. Over the scrubs, he is wearing his white coat. A painful yawn strikes him while he is stirring some veggies in the pan, but he keeps cooking. Izuku lays the plate of rice and stir-fry on the table and washes the dishes. He eats in complete silence, not a single thought crossing his mind, just blank. Once he's finished, he rises and beelines to the bathroom, where he catches sight of himself in the small mirror over the sink. His hair a mess of soft, dark curls is slightly flattened from the long night shift and the hair cap he had to put on when he entered surgery around midnight. A few stray curls stick up rebelliously. The dark circles under his eyes seem a little more prominent than usual. With a sigh, Izuku rubs his eyes and splashes some cold water on his face. He splashes water on his hair too, applying a bit of curl cream as he runs his fingers through his hair, ruffling it gently. That'll have to do, he murmurs. His reflection offers him a look of tired, just tired. He opened the closet behind the mirror, grabbing a small tube of concealer and a makeup sponge. After applying 2 dots of the product under each eye, he wets the sponge with cold water and squishes it. Now inflated and damp, he blends the concealer over his under eye, extending it to the higher part of his cheekbone. The concealer was light coverage, so it wouldn't look weird covering half of his freckles, but it does enough for his eye bags. Medical school left him with permanent eye bags, but it also gave him friends who taught him the art of subtle makeup. He takes another quick look before heading back to his room. It's still early, around 8 a.m., and classes start in less than an hour. Grabbing his phone and the lanyard with his teacher ID and his keys, along with a thermos from the cupboard, he exits his apartment. He knows he'll need coffee to get through the morning. In the hallway, the gentle hum of the building's heating system fills the quiet space as he makes his way to the teacher's lounge. The building is familiar and calming now, but the quiet gives him too much time to think, to acknowledge just how tired he is. He steps into the lounge and heads for the coffee machine, filling his thermos slowly as he takes a moment to just breathe. His fingers tap lightly on the lid as the smell of coffee fills the room, a small source of comfort. Izuku adds some creamer and sugar to his coffee, then puts the lid on the thermos and walks to his desk. Morning, Izuku. Hisashi's voice rings out with energy that Izuku could only dream of at this hour. He turns to see the blonde hero strolling in, his usual bright grin in place. Izuku smiles, though it feels faint. Morning. Hisashi. Hisashi studies him for a moment, hands on his hips. You look tired, kid. You sure you're okay to teach today? I'm fine, I was called to surgery at midnight, and it took longer than expected, but I'm used to the night shift, Izuku says, taking a sip of his coffee. It's sweeter than usual, but it'll do the job. I've got class 3A this morning, so I wanted to make sure I'm ready. Hisashi whistles low, eyes widening slightly. You've got shows, kids, duh. As if on cue, Aizawa enters the lounge, his eyes immediately locking on Izuku. His usual tired expression softens slightly as he acknowledges the green-haired doctor. They're problem children. Izuku chuckles lightly, still cradling his thermos. I heard they're a bit of a challenge. A challenge is one way to put it, Aizawa mutters, rubbing his eyes. That class has been through more in their first year than most pro-heroes. They've seen villain attacks, been at the center of national incidents. They're resilient, though. That's good to know. Aizawa studies him for a moment longer, as if considering whether to say something, but ultimately he nods. Just make sure you pace yourself. You can't help them if you're burned out. I know, Izuku replies, smiling faintly. Hisashi claps his hands together, breaking the tension with a knowing grin. You'll do great, Izuku. Don't worry, I think they're gonna love you. Izuku takes a deep breath, then flashes them both a confident smile. Thanks, Hisashi. You too, Aizawa. With his class folder tucked under his arm and his thermos in hand, Izuku steps out of the lounge and heads down the hallway toward Class 3A. His heart picks up a bit, excitement and nerves mixing together. He's been through surgeries, all-night shifts, and some of the most intense emergencies. But stepping into a classroom full of students feels like an entirely different kind of pressure. As he nears the classroom, Izuku hears the chatter of students on the other side of the door. He pauses just before entering, overhearing snippets of their conversation. Maybe it's Recovery Girl, a girl wonders aloud, her voice calm and thoughtful. I wouldn't be surprised, a boy replies in a formal tone. It would make sense for a veteran healer to teach us first aid. Another voice chimes in, softer this time. Yeah, we've had her patch us up enough times, she could probably teach the class in her sleep. There's a light chuckle among the students, and Izuku takes that as his cue. The door slides open, and a man enters the room. Good morning, Recovery Dash, a few students begin to greet, but their words falter mid-sentence, cut off by the sight of the man standing before them. He wasn't quite what they had expected. Standing just a bit shorter than most of their regular teachers, the man had a youthful face, freckles splattered all over his face. He had curly hair, a green so dark it looked black. His eyes, a striking emerald green, were sharp but kind, though shadowed with a weariness that clearly came from far too many sleepless nights. His posture was upright, and his burgundy scrubs were neatly pressed. The man was wearing a white coat, with his teacher ID around his neck. There was a moment of stunned silence as the students processed the person standing before them. Izuku smiled warmly at the class. Good morning, everyone. Before anyone could reply, Bakugu's voice exploded through the stillness like a thunderclap. What the hell are you doing here, DMN nerd? Screamed the explosive blonde in mere confusion and shock. Izuku's smile didn't waver, though a flicker of amusement lit his eyes. Good morning to you too, buddy. The class was thrown into a state of bewildered confusion. Whispers and questions erupted among the students as they exchanged puzzled glances. Wait, who are you? And how do you know Bakugu? Kaminari blurted out, his eyes wide with disbelief. Bakugu is so antisocial, the thought of him knowing other people outside this class feels weird. Bakugu's face turned a deep red, and he shot Kaminari a scathing glare. Go die, dunce face, he said, flipping him off. Izuku chuckled softly, shaking his head. Katsuki and I go way back. We're childhood friends. I used to babysit him until he was old enough to fend for himself, and then I left for college. The students' confusion turned to curiosity as they listened to Izuku's explanation. I'm Midoriya Izuku, he continued, a surgeon at Muzutafu General Hospital. I'm here to be your first aid teacher. He paused as he saw a mix of interest and skepticism on their faces. I'll be teaching you the basics of first aid, including how to handle emergencies, basic life support, and a few more advanced techniques. I've got a syllabus here for you. Izuku reached into his folder and began passing out printed copies of the syllabus to the students. As he moved through the rows, he continued explaining. We'll cover a variety of topics over the year, and, let me tell you, this is a very hands-on class. My goal is to teach you all you need to know in order to respond to a medical emergency in the field. The students accepted the papers with varying degrees of curiosity and apprehension. Izuku saw some students furiously taking notes, as well as others reading the papers he was handing out. Now that we've got the basics covered, let's do a quick roll call so I can get to know each of you a bit better, Izuku said, his tone upbeat despite his exhaustion. When I call your name, please tell us your quirk, your hero name if you have one, and something interesting about yourself. He glanced down at his list. Let's start with you, Aoyama Yuga. The boy stood up with a flourish. He had beautiful blonde hair, that curled a bit at the ends, and bright blue eyes. Here. My quirk is Naval Laser, and my hero name is Can't Stop Twinkling. I'm very passionate about la mode. Nice to meet you, Aoyama, Izuku said, nodding appreciatively. Next, Ashido Mina. Mina stood up energetically. She had pink skin and light pink curly hair, a pair of horns hidden between coils. What was most interesting about her were her eyes, which were a hazel yellow, and the scara was completely black. Here. My hero name is Pinky. My quirk is acid, and I love dancing. Izuku chuckled softly. Great to know, Ashido. Tsuyu Azui? The girl behind Ashido stood up, and in an instant, Izuku deducted that she had a mutation quirk. She had long dark green hair and big black eyes, and her facial features reminded Izuku of a frog. Her calm voice filled the room. Please call me Tsu. My quirk is Frog and my hero name is Froppy. I like swimming, Karo. Wonderful, Tsu-chan, Izuku said with a smile. Ida Tenya? Tenya stood up straight, his expression serious. He recognized his voice from his little eavesdropping before. I'm Tenya Ida, and my hero name is Ingenium. My quirk is Engine. I value justice and DSPLN highly, and as class vice rep, I make sure to maintain good morals as future pro-heroes. And oh my god, this kid must be Ingenium's little brother. The speed hero had retired 2 years ago after becoming paralyzed from the waist down after an encounter with a villain, so it totally made sense for his little brother to inherit the name. I'm sure you'll be a great help in class, Izuku said. Uraraka Ochako? The girl beamed as she introduced herself. She had short brown hair and brown eyes, and her cheeks looked permanently blushed. My quirk is Zero Gravity. My hero name is Uravity. I'm very enthusiastic about space and stargazing. Nice to meet you, Uraraka. Ojiro Mashireo? The blonde boy stood up with a friendly grin, and Izuku noticed the tail that waved slightly behind the kid. My hero name is Tailman. My quirk is Tail, pretty telling. I'm into martial arts. Izuku nodded. Kaminari Denki? Denki waved with a grin. I'm Denki Kaminari, and my hero name is Charge Bolt. My quirk is Electrification. I'm a big fan of gaming, and I can charge your phone if it ever dies. Izuku giggled at the last comment, looking up at the blonde boy with a smile. Nice to meet you, Kaminari. I'm sure that's a useful ability. Now, Ijiru Kirishima. Ijiru stood up, radiating the energy of a golden retriever but with bright red hair. It kind of reminded Izuku of Clifford. I'm Ijiru Kirishima, known as Red Riot. My quirk is Hardening. I'm a huge fan of Crimson Riot, he's super manly, said the red boy, activating his quirk on his hands and punching his fists. His arms looked like rocks. That's a first, not many people know about Crimson. Izuku smiled warmly. Koji Koda? The boy stood quietly, despite being so tall, he scrunched his shoulders to seem smaller. My quirk is Ani Voice, and my hero name is Anima. I have a bunny. Ah, that's so cute, said Izuku, cooing at the thought of a bunny. Rikido Sato? Rikido smiled. Here. My quirk is Sugar Rush, and my hero name is Sugarman. I'm also really into baking. Sato, are you by chance related to Sato Fuyuki? Asked the young doctor while looking at the teen. He had tanned skin and a broad build. She is my mother, why do you ask? Answered Sato with a confused look. Izuku raised an eyebrow, intrigued. I work with your mother, he said, noting the boy's surprised expression. She's a fantastic nurse, added Izuku, noting the Sato's pleased look. Shuji Mezu? Shuji stood up and Izuku had a better look at the boy. He was tall, probably the tallest in the class, and had several arms. His hair was white, and his face was almost completely covered by a mask. The teen gave a nod. My quirk is Dupli Arms, I can grow additional limbs. My hero name is Tentacle. I like reading. Kyuka Jairu? A girl stood up from behind him, which Izuku hadn't noticed. It was like she disappeared behind the tall boy. She had short, dark purple hair and sharp eyes. What was interesting was the earphone jacks that hung from his ears, like earrings. Kyuka gave a small wave. I'm Kyuka Jairu, hero name, earphone jack. My quirk, with the same name, allows me to use my earphone jacks to amplify sound. I love music and playing guitar. That's really cool, Jairu, said Izuku with a warm smile. Hanta Siro? Hanta flashed a bright smile. He was tall and fit, with black hair that reached his shoulders. I'm Hanta Siro, Cellophane. My quirk is called tape, and it lets me shoot tape from my elbows. I'm into parkour lately and other activities. Izuku could hear snickering from other students when the boy said that last thing. Yeah, cool. Yeah, he definitely had a hint of what the teen meant, but he wasn't going to ask. He checked the list for the next name. Tokoyami Fumikage? A boy rose from the last seat. He had the head of a bird. Izuku was no professional, but he could assume that he was a crow. My hero name is Tsukuyami, and my quirk is Dark Shadow. I have, he said, but was interrupted when a shadowy entity, with the shape of a crow, escaped his chest. Hello, said the being. Oh, now Izuku was very interested. That is Dark Shadow, said the teen, murmuring a, come here, when he saw the shadow approaching Izuku. Oh, hey there. You're really pretty, said Izuku as he saw the bird-like shadow circle him, almost like it was examining him. The shadow approached him, lowering its head as if inviting Izuku to touch it. The young doctor complied with a big smile and softly caressed its head for a couple of seconds. Then, the shadow retreated to the teen's chest. You were saying? Asked Izuku, looking at Tokoyami, completely ignoring the other students' shocked faces. Oh. I have a strong interest in literature and philosophy. What a mad banquet of darkness, said the teen, whispering the last thing. Amazing. Todoroki Shudo? Shudo stood up with a straight face. Half of his hair was white, while the other was red, and Izuku tried not to wince at the sight of the scar that surrounded his left eye. My quirk is half cold half hot, and my hero name is Shudo. I like cold soba. That was weird. This was something he definitely wanted to ask about, but today was not the day, so he kept reading the list. Hagakure Turu? A girl in the front stood up, or at least that's what Izuku thought. The only thing that was visible about her was her uniform, which moved as she beamed. Her voice was light and cheerful. Hi. My quirk is invisibility and my hero name is Invisible Girl. I love spending time with my friends. Izuku smiled when he reached the next name. Katsuki Bakugu, he said with a knowing look, his eyes landing on the explosive blonde. Katsuki's intense gaze met Izuku's. Great explosion murder god dynamite, my quirk is explosion, you know that. I'm going to become the #1 hero. He said it with his usual sharp look. I do know that, Kat, his laugh bubbled in the dead silent room. Shinso Hitoshi? The boy stood up quietly, he had purple hair and matching lilac eyes. Hitoshi, standing calmly, gave a nod. My quirk is brainwashing, and my hero name is Mindjack. I like reading, he said. His voice was low and raspy. He kind of reminded him of Aizawa. Shinso, are you related to Aizawa? If you don't mind me asking, asked the young doctor. And before the purple-haired teen could answer, the shallow classroom busted into laughter, including him. And now Izuku was confused. Did he say something funny? No, we're not related. I mean, he is my dad, but we're not blood-related, said Shinso between laughing and catching his breath. Izuku felt as if his shoulders relaxed, he wasn't holding his breath anymore. He thought he had said something embarrassing or that could make the teen uncomfortable, but seeing Shinso laughing softly as if Izuku just told some lame joke, it was relieving. Oh, well, that's good to hear. And finally, Momo Yaoyorozu? Momo stood, her demeanor graceful. My quirk is creation, allowing me to produce objects from the lipids of my body. My hero name is Creati. I like doing pottery, said the girl with a blush on her face. Wow, that's unexpected, but cool, commented Izuku. Yeah, all of our dishes in the dorms are made by her, said Jairu, twirling one of her ear jacks with her finger. It's a cool hobby, pretty useful, said Izuku. As the last student sat down, Izuku gathered the roll call list and looked at the class. Thank you all for sharing. I'm excited to work with each of you this year. The bell rang, signaling the end of the PRD. The students started to gather their things, exchanging glances and murmurs about their new teacher. Izuku watched them with a satisfied smile before grabbing his stiff and heading out of the classroom. In the hallway, he was stopped by Katsuki. His usual intense expression was softened by a rare, genuine smile. Yo, Izuku. Izuku's eyes lit up with a warm smile. Katsuki. It's so good to see you, bud, you've grown so much. They embraced in a hug, and Katsuki's usual gruffness was replaced by a softer tone. What are you, my mom? Didn't expect you to be teaching here, said Katsuki, breaking the hug. Izuku chuckled softly. It's been a while, hasn't it? I'm sorry, with all the moving in and preparing for classes, I forgot to tell you. I think I haven't told my mom yet. Katsuki nodded, his gaze turning more serious. You holding up okay? You look like you could use some rest. Asked the blonde teen, crossing his arms over his chest. Izuku waved it off with a tired smile. Nah, I just have to get used to these hours. Hey, I wish I had more time today to talk. You have my number, we can hang out another day, and I'll tell you everything you want. said the young doctor, ruffling the spiky blonde hair of his friend. Yeah, you owe me ramen, stated Katsuki, putting his hands in his pockets. Sure thing, said Izuku, his smile bright as the sun. Hey, Aizu. Started the blonde, his tone suddenly soft and serious. What is it? Are you okay? Asked Izuku, worried by the sudden change. Yeah, it's been years since he's seen the young boy, but it wasn't every day that he was this serious. Never mind, another day, mumbled Katsuki. He turned around quickly, walking away to his class. That was a sign for Izuku to leave. 2. Even though Katsuki had changed a lot, he knew he would have to wait until he decided to speak. He turned around and started walking towards the teacher's lounge. He didn't notice that Katsuki stopped walking and watched Izuku walk away. Izuku didn't notice either that Katsuki saw how he visibly relaxed his shoulders and rubbed the back of his neck. He ran a hand through his curls and let out a deep, weary sigh. The adrenaline from the class had worn off, and the exhaustion he'd been holding at bay began to catch up with him. He needed to get used to this ASAP. The smell of home after being at the hospital for 10 hours was comforting. Izuku sat on the table, his class folder open and papers covering every surface. He didn't have any classes today. Wednesdays were his free day, which meant he could catch up with some sleep after he finished his work. It had been 6 weeks since he joined the UA staff, and he still felt a rush of pride when he thought about it. His students were doing so well, adapting quickly to his teaching style and were quick to learn the techniques he explained. The sports festival had already come and gone, with Katsuki securing first place, of course. Izuku couldn't help but smile as he reviewed the case studies he'd gathered from the hospital, tailoring them to scenarios the students might face in the field. It was important to introduce the realities of medical emergencies before they had to apply this knowledge in real life. The pressure to teach them the right balance of action and caution weighed heavily on him. He had seen firsthand how a hero's life could change in an instant with one injury. Still, for now, the room was quiet. The light streaming through the windows was warm, casting a soft glow over the pages scattered in front of him. Izuku exhaled, finally allowing himself to relax, even if just for a moment. His mind, though, kept drifting back to Aizawa. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the worry that gnawed at him. It had started the first week after Izuku joined UA. Aizawa had come home mere seconds after Izuku entered the building, limping slightly, his hand clutching his side. At first, Izuku treated him, thinking this was just a one-time thing, but over the next few weeks, it became clear that it wasn't going to be. The hero always tried to hide his injuries, but Izuku could spot them: subtle shifts in posture, the stiffness in his movements. Each time, Izuku treated him quietly, never making a fuss, but the injuries had grown worse. Now, even when Aizawa tried to conceal the damage, Izuku could see through it. And Aizawa. He was stubborn, more so than anyone Izuku had ever known. A pang of concern pulled him out of his peaceful moment. His brows furrowed, remembering the sight of Aizawa's bloodied hand when he tried to wave off help a week ago. He hadn't even bothered to clean the wound properly before trying to stagger back to his apartment. That day Izuku met Eri, Aizawa's other adoptive child. She is 8 years old and has the most beautiful light blue-gray hair and eyes like rubies and the most precious laugh Izuku's ever heard. And Izuku felt so bad for worrying her little heart when he entered Aizawa's apartment with the wounded man. He may have bought her a pack of colorful hair ties because he definitely noticed the braids on her hair. He also may have promised her to teach her how to do French braids. Izuku rubbed at his temples, trying to push the thoughts away. Today was supposed to be his break. He wasn't supposed to worry about Aizawa right now. But the feeling lingered, a tight knot of anxiety sitting in his chest. He had a bad feeling. Just as Izuku shifted in his seat, ready to start reading his papers again, there was a soft, unsteady knock on his door. His heart lurched in his chest. When he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. Aizawa stood there, barely on his feet. Blood dripped from an open wound in his abdomen, soaking his hero costume and pooling at his feet. His face was pale, his eyes heavy-lidded as if he might pass out at any moment. You said to reach out if I needed help," Aizawa murmured before his knees buckled. Izuku's world tilted, but only for a moment. The sight of Aizawa, bloody and barely conscious on his doorstep, ignited an immediate and intense alarm. His breath quickened, but his mind switched into overdrive as his instincts sharpened and took control. Without hesitation, Izuku grabbed Aizawa's arm, pulling him inside just before the man's knees fully gave out. "DMN it, Aizawa," Izuku muttered under his breath, half carrying, half dragging the injured hero toward the sofa. His mind was racing, calculating, and assessing the damage as his hands worked on autopilot. Blood was already trailing behind them, smearing across the floor, but that was the least of his concerns. "Stay with me," Izuku urged, his voice soft but firm as he guided Aizawa down onto the couch. He grabbed a few tablecloths from the nearby cabinet, quickly laying them beneath Aizawa to catch the bleeding. The sofa was already stained, but Izuku barely cared. His focus was on Aizawa, the way his breathing was shallow, how his lips were turning pale, and how his skin was stiff under Izuku's touch. His eyes quickly scanned Aizawa's body, starting with the arm where the burn was. The hero's costume had melted into his skin in some places, black fabric fused into raw, blistering flesh. The smell of burnt skin made Izuku's stomach churn, but he didn't flinch. The wound was severe second degree, at least, but it wasn't the most immediate threat. Izuku stood up and flashed towards the bathroom, grabbing his home medical kit, a big white box, from under the sink. He opened it the moment he landed next to Aizawa's body, immediately putting on a face mask and getting his gloves ready. "I'm going to use my quirk," he said before grazing the hero's forehead with his fingers. The warm sensation spread through Aizawa's body as Izuku touched him. He made sure that the effect would last enough. As he worked, his mind flashed with memories of the injuries he'd treated at the hospital: burns from explosions, punctures from metal and glass. It was the kind of injury that could easily put someone out of commission for weeks, if not longer. "This wound is not recent, Aizawa," said Izuku, putting on his gloves. Aizawa's abdomen was what truly scared him. The laceration on his right side was jagged, and blood was gushing out at a rate that made Izuku's heart race. The blood was bright red and spurting, and Izuku was sure he could see the fatty tissue exposed beneath. His pulse quickened at the sight. If he didn't stop the bleeding soon, Aizawa would pass out from blood loss. "Why did you wait this long?" Izuku muttered, though Aizawa didn't respond. His jaw was clenched tightly, his face twisted in pain, but the man remained silent. It was infuriating. Aizawa was so stubborn. Always trying to push through, always refusing to let anyone help until it was nearly too late. Izuku's hands were steady as he reached for the scissors and cut through the remaining fabric of Aizawa's hero costume, peeling the ruined material away from the wounds. It stuck in some places, tearing at the blistered skin beneath, and Izuku hissed softly in sympathy. "Sorry, but this needs to come off," he murmured, focused entirely on the task at hand. Izuku's eyes darted back to the laceration once he discarded the scissors, his worry intensifying. Blood still oozed from the gash, staining Aizawa's abdomen and soaking through the tablecloth beneath him. Izuku's hands moved quickly, applying pressure to stop the bleeding as he reached for a suture kit. "I've got you. Just hang in there." His voice was steady, but inside, his nerves were fraying. He cleaned the area around the puncture, the cotton ball soaking the skin with water. He checked the inside of the wound, emerald eyes meeting with angry red muscle and a thin layer of fatty tissue, before he threaded the needle and began stitching the wound closed. The room was silent except for the steady, rhythmic sound of Izuku's breathing, the snip of scissors as he tied off each stitch, and Aizawa's breathing. He continued stitching each skin layer until he tied the last knot. Izuku checked the sutured wound, making sure no blood was gushing out, and moved on to the hero's arm. The burn was severe, angry red and already blistering. The smell of burnt flesh still clung in the air. His hero costume had fused into the wound, bits of fabric melted into the charred skin. The puncture wound was stabilized, but Izuku couldn't afford to lose focus now. Aizawa's body was still vulnerable, and any mishandling of the burn could lead to infection or further damage. He reached for a pair of fine-tipped tweezers and small precision scissors and took them out of the sterilized packets. "I'm going to start working on the burn now," Izuku said softly, glancing at Aizawa, who lay still, eyes closed, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. Izuku knew Aizawa couldn't feel the pain still high on his quirk, but the heat from the burn was still radiating. As Izuku began snipping away at the edges of the melted fabric, Aizawa groaned. It wasn't from pain but from the heat, a deep discomfort that even Izuku's quirk couldn't fully erase. The skin was sensitive, angry, and raw. Izuku's hand paused, his voice low and soothing. "I know it feels strange, but you're going to be all right. Just a little longer, okay? You're doing fine," he murmured, hoping his words could offer some level of comfort. Aizawa grunted, eyes half-lidded, clearly still reluctant to show any sign of weakness. The hero nodded slightly, and he took it as a green light. Izuku's heart squeezed at the sight, but he kept his hand steady. He carefully maneuvered the tweezers, pulling away the melted bits of fabric as gently as he could. It was delicate work, each piece coming off with slow precision to avoid ripping more of the damaged skin. His fingers worked methodically, cutting small sections free, all while monitoring Aizawa's reactions. There was another groan, this one deeper than the last. The sound made Izuku glance up, just in time to see Aizawa's jaw tighten. Even numbed by his quirk, Aizawa's body reacted on instinct to the trauma it had suffered. The heat was unbearable, and the tension in Aizawa's muscles made it clear that, despite everything, he was still fighting against the sensation. You don't have to hold it all in, Aizawa, Izuku said, his tone firm but gentle. I've got you. Aizawa didn't reply, but the tension in his face eased slightly. Izuku took it as permission to continue. With each tug, more of the black fabric came free, revealing the raw skin beneath. The burn was worse than he had initially thought, deep and severe enough that the top layers of skin had peeled away, exposing flesh that was swollen and blistering. Izuku's hands moved quicker now, but still carefully. His focus was sharp, his mind laser-focused on ensuring that no more damage was caused. He placed the tweezers aside and grabbed a small, sterile cloth, dipping it in cool water to gently clean the area. The moisture helped ease some of the heat radiating from the burn, though Aizawa shuddered beneath his touch. He hesitated for a moment, then reached up to rest his other hand on Aizawa's shoulder. The small gesture was meant to reassure, a silent promise that he was here, that Aizawa didn't have to bear this alone. You're doing great, Izuku whispered. He could feel the strain in Aizawa's body. The silence stretched between them as Izuku continued, his attention returning to the burn. He applied a cooling gel to the wound, feeling the tension in Aizawa's arm ease as the burn's heat was slowly neutralized. He reached for the bandages, moving with practiced efficiency, wrapping the damaged skin in soft, sterile gauze. He also wrapped Aizawa's abdomen, with a lot more difficulty because the hero was heavy, compressing the tissue. Each movement was careful. As Izuku finished, he sat back for a moment, his eyes tracing over Aizawa's form. The burn was treated, the puncture wound was stitched, but Aizawa still looked so fragile, lying there pale, exhausted, heavy muscles almost fusing with the sofa as the exhaustion overcame his body. Should've handled it sooner, sorry, Aizawa muttered, barely audible through gritted teeth. Izuku paused, looking up at Aizawa's face. He wasn't sure if the man was apologizing or simply acknowledging his own mistake, but either way, it didn't matter right now. He took his gloves and the mask and shoved them inside a plastic bag, along with other disposable elements. Yeah, you should have, Izuku muttered, his voice soft. There was still so much blood. Too much. And it was everywhere. On the couch, on the tablecloths under Aizawa's body, on Izuku's scrubs. Thank God he didn't change after arriving home from the hospital, and on the floor. Either way, you did great, you handled it so well. Now rest for a bit, said Izuku, caressing the man's wild hair and arranging some stray locks that fell to his face. He looked at the scar over his left brow, that wound that he had stitched up not so long ago, now scarred and pink. Izuku stood up from where he had been kneeling beside Aizawa, his hands still tingling with the ghost of adrenaline. He sighed softly, glancing over at the unconscious man, who looked far more peaceful than he had an hour ago. His eyes scanned the room, searching for his phone. Amid the clutter of medical supplies and scattered papers, he spotted it buried beneath some documents on the table. He wiped his hands on his pants, more out of habit than necessity, and picked it up, dialing Recovery Girl's number. The phone rang only once before she answered, her voice a comforting familiarity in the quiet room. Hello, Izuku? Is everything okay, dearie? You're not one to call at these hours, Recovery Girl's gentle but alert voice came through. Izuku swallowed and glanced at Aizawa again, his chest rising and falling slowly. I'm sorry for bothering you, Chiyo-san. It's Aizawa. He just appeared by my door. He got hurt pretty badly. I already patched him up, but I was hoping you could come by and give him a dose of your quirk. Just to be sure. Her voice softened further. Oh dear, of course. I'll head over right away. Hang tight, Izuku. She hung up before he could respond, the line cutting to silence. Izuku lowered the phone, staring at it for a moment before setting it back on the table. He glanced around at the mess of bloodied towels and bandages, the faint metallic scent still clinging to the air. It had been a hell of a morning. True to her word, Recovery Girl arrived not long after, her presence a calming force as she entered Izuku's apartment. She took one look at the scene, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the blood-stained cloths under Aizawa and the medical kit next to the sofa. Looks like you've been busy, she commented lightly, then raised a brow. I can call someone to help clean this up, you know. Izuku shook his head with a faint, tired smile. No, it's all right. Cleaning's sort of like therapy for me. She hummed in understanding, though her expression showed a hint of concern. She stepped over to where Aizawa lay and stood beside him, her movements gentle but practiced as she leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to his forehead. There we go. That should stabilize him, she remarked, nodding contentedly as soon as she noticed Aizawa's breathing stop being labored. But he'll need another dose once he's fully awake. Make sure he sleeps for a couple of hours, and after that, take him to his place and give me another call, so I can top him off. Izuku nodded gratefully. I will. Thank you so much for coming so quickly, Chiyo-san. Of course, dearie. She straightened up as she cast another glance at Aizawa. Then, with a sly smile, she added, I'm going to lecture him once he's awake, he never takes care of himself. Izuku's smile faltered. No, I think I'll handle that once he's recovered. I have a few things I'd like to say to him. Please. Recovery girl chuckled. Okay. You know where to find me if you need help. She grabbed his hand and squeezed it lightly before heading to the door. Take care of yourself too, Izuku. You've done well. As the door closed behind her, the apartment felt a little quieter, a little calmer. Izuku looked down at Aizawa, his face softened with exhaustion, and sighed. There was still plenty of work to be done, but for now, things were starting to settle. Izuku went to the bathroom and grabbed a hand towel, soaking it in warm water before heading to the living room, kneeling next to Aizawa once again. With gentle, deliberate strokes, Izuku began cleaning the blood from Aizawa's body. The dark crimson stains contrasted sharply against Aizawa's pale skin, and Izuku's heart ached with each sweep of the damp cloth. He could see the remnants of battle, the jagged cuts, bruises, and the unmistakable fatigue etched into Aizawa's features. He could also see scars, lots of those. Some were pale, almost invisible to the untrained eye, others were pinkish. Some others were jagged, hard scar tissue and rough edges. Izuku's hands moved with practiced precision, his brows strained with concern. Each pass of the cloth was an act of care. He focused on the task at hand, trying to push aside the surge of worry that threatened to overwhelm him. When he was satisfied that the worst of the blood was removed, Izuku carefully folded the cloth and set it aside. He rose to take a quick shower, the cool water washing away the stress and grime of the day. He applied curl cream to his hair, let it air dry, and went to his room to change into pajama pants and a hoodie. Afterward, he moved to the laundry room, loading the washing machine with the bloodied clothes and tablecloths. The rhythmic sound of the washer filled the apartment. With the initial cleanup underway, Izuku turned his attention to the rest of the apartment. He mopped the blood-stained floors until they were spotless, the smell of disinfectant filling his nose in a nostalgic embrace. He liked the smell, it reminded him of the hospital in the warmest way, it reminded him that he was there. Izuku's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He could still see the image of Aizawa, bloodied and bruised, and the worry that had gripped him was intense. He wondered if he had done enough. By the time Izuku finished tidying up, he had created a semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. The apartment felt calmer, more serene, though the shadow of what had happened still lingered. The sound of the washing machine winding down as he settled down to rest was a small solace, a reminder that even in the face of catastrophe, there was a way to restore order. After finishing the initial cleanup, Izuku knew he needed to reach out to Shinso. He also needed to tell Eri, but she was in daycare, meaning, Nedzu hired a teacher to help her keep up with her studies because there was no way in this world she was ready to go to primary school, yet. He went for his phone and opened his chat with Katsuki. Zu. Hey bud. 1537. Zu. Can you give me Shinsu's number? I need to tell him something regarding his father. 1537. Cats. TF. 1539. Cats. Contact, Shinso Hitoshi. 1539. Cats. You text like a grandpa. 1540. He laughed at the last message but opted to not answer it, opening a new chat with Shinsu's contact. Midoriya Izuku. Hi Shinso, this is Midoriya Izuku. 1540. Midoriya Izuku. Katsuki gave me your number. 1541. Midoriya Izuku. Your father was injured during patrol, I've already patched him up. He's resting, so when he wakes up, I'm taking him to his apartment. Just letting you know. 1541. Shinso Hitoshi. Hey. 1541. Shinso Hitoshi. THX for letting me know. 1542. Izuku exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, putting his phone away and turning his attention back to the tasks at hand. He tidied up the remnants of his work, organizing the scattered papers on the table. Aizawa stirred, a low groan escaping him as dark eyes blinked open. His body felt sore, but the sharp, stabbing pain from earlier had dulled to an aching throb. Slowly, his gaze adjusted to the white light of the apartment, and he noticed Izuku sitting nearby, his face etched with concern. Aizawa? Izuku's voice was soft, tentative, as if he wasn't sure Aizawa was fully awake yet. Aizawa cleared his throat, trying to push himself into a sitting position. His limbs felt heavy, but the overwhelming fatigue had lessened significantly. I'm fine, he grunted, though the words were more automatic than accurate. You're not fine, Izuku replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. But you're better. That's something. Izuku stood and extended his hand, helping Aizawa to his feet. Despite the lingering exhaustion in his bones, Aizawa found that he could move without much assistance, which was more than he had hoped for when he arrived at his doorstep, bloodied and barely conscious. Come on, Izuku said, his keys and his phone, stuffing them in his hoodie's pocket. I'll take you home. Aizawa nodded, too tired to argue, and followed Izuku out of the apartment. The walk to Aizawa's place was quiet, the only sound was the elevator's dumb music. When they reached the 4th floor, the doors opened, and Aizawa led Izuku to his door. When they arrived, the door to Aizawa's apartment was already slightly ajar. Izuku pushed it open gently, revealing Eri and Shinso sitting on the couch. Eri's face lit up the moment she saw them, her eyes wide with excitement. Dad! Eri exclaimed, rushing over to Aizawa. She hugged him, careful not to hurt him, and then turned her attention to Izuku, beaming with happiness. Izuku! You're here! Of course I am, Eri, Izuku replied with a soft laugh. He kneeled down to her level and patted her head affectionately. I told you I'd take care of him. Aizawa watched as his daughter clung to Izuku with a look of pure adoration. It was as if the weight of the world had been lifted from her small shoulders. She tugged on Izuku's sleeve, leading him toward the couch where Hitoshi sat, a faint smile on his face. Aizawa followed, sinking into the couch with a deep sigh. I'll call Recovery Girl, Izuku said, pulling his phone from his pocket. He hid himself in the kitchen while he dialed quickly, giving her a brief update on Aizawa's condition and letting her know that they were at the hero's apartment. She'll be here soon, Izuku said as he ended the call, coming back to the living room and turning his attention back to Eri. The little girl was staring at him with big, expectant eyes. Izuku, she asked softly, tilting her head. Yes, Eri, answered Izuku. The little girl sat on the sofa, her big ruby eyes looking at him so bright and Izuku felt like he was melting. Adorable. Can you braid my hair? She asked, her tone hopeful. Izuku's expression softened, and he nodded. Of course, honey. Aizawa watched in silence as Izuku brought a stool from the kitchen, signaling Eri to sit on it, which he did with a bright smile. Izuku stood behind Eri, his hands moving with gentle precision as he braided her long gray hair. Eri's face lit up with joy, her smile growing wider with each pass of Izuku's tender fingers. There was something so domestic about the scene, so tender, that Aizawa found himself staring longer than he intended to. Izuku, in his red plaid pajama pants and black hoodie, looked soft. His usually wild curls were neatly framed around his face, and there was a calmness about him that Aizawa hadn't fully noticed before. It was strange seeing him like this relaxed, taking care of Eri with a natural ease. For a moment, Aizawa felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the warmth of the room and the sound of Eri giggling as Izuku worked. It was a rare moment of peace, and he wasn't about to let his thoughts ruin it. A soft knock at the door broke the quiet, and Izuku stood, moving toward the entrance to greet Recovery Girl. The elderly heroine stepped inside, her eyes immediately landing on Aizawa as she moved towards him. How are you feeling, Aizawa? She asked, her tone gentle but firm. Better than earlier, Aizawa admitted. Thanks to him. He nodded in Izuku's direction. Yeah, sure, and my quirk didn't help you at all, Recovery Girl said as she prepared to use her quirk. I'm going to give you one last dose. She gently kissed his forehead, a warm sensation spreading through his body as her quirk began to take effect. This time, the dose was lighter, a careful balance between healing and conserving his stamina. Izuku had long been gone. Eri took him to the bathroom so they could choose a hair tie to tie the braids that now decorated her beautiful hair. She laughed as they chose. Once the healing was complete, Recovery Girl packed up her things, but before she could leave, Aizawa's voice stopped her. Wait, he said, his tone hesitant. Is Midoriya mad at me? He seems weird. Recovery Girl paused, her eyes softening as she looked between Aizawa and the corridor where Izuku left. She didn't answer directly, but her smile was kind, almost cryptic. He wanted to wait until you were fully recovered to talk to you, she said, patting his hand. With that, she left, leaving Aizawa with more questions than answers. As Recovery Girl left, Izuku and Eri emerged from the bathroom, the little girl skipping happily beside him, her hair neatly braided and secured with a lavender-colored ribbon they had chosen together. Izuku glanced toward Aizawa, who was still sitting on the couch, looking deep in thought. All right, how about I make you guys some dinner? I don't think Aizawa has the energy to cook right now, Izuku announced, his tone warm but focused as he moved toward the kitchen. Eri, what do you feel like eating tonight? Anything you make is fine, Eri replied, her eyes wide with admiration. Izuku chuckled, glancing over his shoulder. How about some stir-fried veggies and some grilled chicken? Eri's face lit up. Yes, please. With that settled, Izuku busied himself in the kitchen. He moved with practiced ease, chopping vegetables, seasoning the chicken, and heating the pan. His hands worked quickly, yet his mind was somewhere else. While the smell of dinner began to fill the apartment, Aizawa stood up, moving quietly toward the kitchen. Eri was about to follow him there, but Shinso stopped her. "Hey, why don't you tell me about school today?" said the tired teen, signaling his sister to come and sit with him on the sofa. "Whyy, I wanna go with Zoo," complained the girl, following her brother's indications either way. "Those two need to talk," whispered Shinso once Eri was next to him. Eri made a humming sound and nodded, telling him about school. Izuku noticed Aizawa approaching but kept his focus on cooking, hoping he would stay quiet for just a little longer. "Midoriya," Aizawa began, his voice low and dry. He leaned against the counter, watching Izuku's movements with a careful gaze. "Are you mad at me?" Izuku paused mid-chop before setting the knife down. He didn't turn to face Aizawa right away. Instead, he let out a long breath, gathering his thoughts. "I'm not mad at you, Aizawa," he said, his voice steady. "But I am frustrated." Aizawa's brow furrowed slightly, but he stayed quiet, letting Izuku continue. "You have a daughter, Aizawa," Izuku said, finally turning to face him, his eyes soft but filled with an intensity that Aizawa hadn't seen before. "You have Shinso, too. You have people who care about you, who depend on you. And yet, you put yourself in these dangerous situations without a second thought. You come home bleeding, exhausted. Like your life doesn't matter." Izuku's voice remained calm, but there was a weight behind his words that made Aizawa feel every syllable. "I know you're a hero, and I know your line of work is completely different from mine," Izuku continued, turning back to stir the vegetables in the pan. "But that doesn't mean you get to stop caring about yourself. You have a family now, Aizawa. You have people who love you. You can't just throw that away." Aizawa shifted, his mouth opening slightly, but Izuku wasn't finished. "I've seen what happens when heroes push themselves too far," Izuku said quietly, his gaze focused on the pan in front of him. "And I've seen so many of them take their last breath on a cold operating table." His voice wobbled a little, like he wanted to cry. Yet the tears had yet to reach his eyes. Aizawa felt a pang in his chest. This time was a feeling he knew all too well. It was pain. He remained silent, letting the weight of Izuku's words settle between them. Izuku exhaled softly, turning to meet Aizawa's eyes again. "You're important to Eri. To Shinso. To your friends. Even me. You need to remember that." Aizawa stood still for a moment, processing the emotions in Izuku's voice. He had always prided himself on his ability to endure, to push past the pain and keep going. But now, hearing the concern in Izuku's voice, how much it hurt, he felt a sense of familiarity, somewhat. They stood for a while, just looking at each other. Emerald meet onyx irises. Even when Izuku had to look away because the chicken was burning, Aizawa stood still, mouth shut, and brain working at full speed. "I'll try," Aizawa finally said, his voice quieter than usual but genuine. "I can't promise anything." Izuku continued, his green eyes locked onto Aizawa's. "You can't keep throwing yourself into situations like this without a second thought. What if your wound had been worse, and I wasn't able to save you?" Aizawa's mouth tightened, and for a moment, he considered snapping back, brushing off Izuku's concerns with his usual aloofness. But the raw sincerity in Izuku's voice stopped him. Instead, he sighed, rubbing a hand across his stubbled chin. "You're right," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "I'm not invincible. But I can't just stop." Izuku turned off the stove, turning to face him. "I know that. I'm not asking you to stop being a hero. I need you to start thinking about what you're leaving behind if something happens to you. Think about Eri. Think about Shinso." Aizawa remained silent for a long moment, his eyes drifting toward the living room, where Eri's soft giggles echoed, mingling with Hitoshi's low voice. The weight of Izuku's words settled over him like a blanket, heavy and suffocating. "I do think about them," he said finally, voice hoarse. "Every DMN day. But if I don't go out there, who will? Someone has to do the dirty work, Izuku. And I'm good at it." Izuku's face softened. "You don't have to do it alone." "I'll try," repeated Aizawa. Izuku gave him a small smile, relief washing over him. "That's enough." Just then, Eri's voice called from the living room. "Is dinner ready yet?" Izuku turned back to the stove. "Almost, Eri." "Are you eating with us?" asked Eri, her head peeking from the door frame. "Only if you want me to," answered Izuku, looking at Aizawa, as if asking him, "Do you want me here?" "Yeah, stay for dinner," said the man, holding 2 plates and giving him the most awkward and stiff smile Izuku has ever seen. But, oh, DMN, was it genuine? The young doctor felt his cheeks heat up, so he quickly plated one last plate and grabbed the other, heading to the living room to set the table. As they sat down to eat, Hitoshi joined them, his usual stoic demeanor softening at the sight of the warm meal. The soft clinking of chopsticks against bowls filled the air as they gathered around the low table in Aizawa's living room. The warm scent of stir-fried vegetables and grilled chicken hung in the air, mingling with the calm of the evening. Eri sat happily beside Izuku, her small hands clutching her chopsticks with precision. Across from them, Hitoshi leaned into his chair, casually picking at his meal, while Aizawa observed the scene in his usual quiet demeanor. Izuku glanced around the table, feeling a warmth settle into his chest as he watched them. It felt peaceful here, a sense of normalcy wrapped in the quiet hum of the night. He smiled, turning to Shinso. "So, how was school today, Shin?" he began, before stopping as Hitoshi's gaze flicked to him, eyebrow raised slightly. "Call me by my name," Hitoshi interrupted softly, but there was no edge in his tone. Izuku blinked, taken aback for a second before smiling again. "Ah, sorry. Hitoshi, how was school?" Hitoshi gave a small shrug, his chopsticks playing with a piece of carrot in his bowl. "It was fine. Nothing too exciting today." He paused, then swiftly changed the subject, his violet eyes studying Izuku with a hint of curiosity. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask. What's your deal with Bakugo? You two seem close." Izuku straightened a little in his seat, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "Katsuki and I, well, our mothers are best friends, so we grew up together. He's younger than me. His mom, Mitsuki, had him when I was already in middle school." Eri's eyes widened slightly. "So, he's like your little brother?" Izuku chuckled softly, nodding. "Yeah, something like that. You should have seen him, Dad." "Bakugo was fuming when he saw Midoriya enter the class," said Hitoshi, elbowing his father. A faint smile tugged at Hitoshi's lips. Izuku laughed, a genuine sound that filled the space. "Oh my god, I was so embarrassed. I completely forgot to tell him I'd be teaching here, with all the moving and preparing the materials." His cheeks felt too hot. Izuku hid his face with his palms as he heard Hitoshi and Eri giggling, and is that Aizawa's laugh? Aizawa, who had remained mostly silent, glanced toward Izuku, his mind still lingering on the conversation they'd shared in the kitchen. His gaze softened slightly, absorbing the dynamic unfolding between them all. As the bell rings, all the students from Class 3B get up and leave the classroom. It's lunchtime. Izuku stays behind, slowly putting away his things into his work bag. His hands move methodically, but his mind is elsewhere, still preoccupied with thoughts of Aizawa's injury from a few days ago. That memory lingers, the image of Aizawa, stubborn and bruised, refusing to rest properly. He sighed quietly, tucking away a few loose sheets of paper when a familiar presence caught his attention. At the door, just barely inside the classroom, stood Aizawa. Izuku blinked and looked up, surprised but quickly masking it with a small smile. "Aizawa," he greeted. "Everything all right?" Izuku approached the hero, his work bag hanging from his shoulder. Aizawa lingered for a moment in the doorway, his usual cool demeanor not betraying much, though there was a slight tension in his posture. He seemed to hesitate before speaking, his eyes scanning the empty room as if debating whether to proceed. "I have something to ask you," Aizawa finally said, his voice low, almost cautious. Izuku's brow furrowed slightly in curiosity, sensing something more than the usual stoic tone Aizawa often used. "Is it something we should talk about here?" he asked, closing his bag and slinging it over his shoulder. "Or would it be better discussed in private?" Aizawa paused, considering the question before giving a small nod. "Private might be better." Izuku nodded in return, a thoughtful look crossing his face as he quickly weighed the options. "Well, we could have coffee at my place if that works for you," proposed the younger man, his eyes scanning Aizawa's face for any sign of disapproval. Aizawa's dark eyes flickered with uncertainty, though only for a brief second, and then he gave a short nod. "All right." The walk to Izuku's apartment was quiet, the spring breeze brushing past them as they left the school grounds. Despite the unspoken tension, there was a strange ease to walking side by side, neither of them feeling the need to fill the silence with small talk. Aizawa, with his hands buried in his hero costume's pockets, glanced at Izuku occasionally, watching the way the younger man walked. His green curls bounced with each step, some of them had moved to his face with the breeze. His face, sun-kissed and splashed with thousands of freckles, looked so relaxed. It was getting hot at this time of the year. When they arrived at Izuku's apartment, Aizawa couldn't help but look around the apartment he had visited before, though in more chaotic circumstances. Back then, Aizawa had been too focused on his injuries to pay attention to his surroundings, maybe a little too high on Izuku's quirk. Now, he took in the space with a more attentive eye. Izuku's apartment was simple but cozy. The small kitchen opened into a living area filled with bookshelves and a table cluttered with notes and papers. Everything had its place, yet there was a certain comfort to the mess, as if Izuku's mind was always buzzing with something. "Make yourself comfortable," Izuku said, his voice breaking the silence. He grabbed the papers from the table and took them to the bedroom, leaving it empty. The young doctor came back, his work bag nowhere to be seen, and moved toward the kitchen. "I'll get the coffee started." Aizawa settled onto one of the chairs near the table, glancing around the room as Izuku began preparing the coffee. He felt an odd sense of familiarity here. A comfortable feeling lingered in his chest, though he quickly dismissed the thought. This was just another conversation, another exchange. Nothing more. "First time I'm actually seeing your place," Aizawa commented, his voice neutral, though his gaze swept across the room with mild curiosity. He noticed a singular All Might figurine on one of the top shelves of a bookshelf, as well as what he could recognize as comic books. Though those didn't equal the amount of medical books that filled the bookshelves. Izuku giggled, glancing over his shoulder. "Yeah, I guess the last time doesn't really count. You weren't exactly in the best shape." Aizawa huffed a small laugh. "That's putting it lightly." He didn't notice how Izuku's eyes lingered over his face. The quiet sound of coffee brewing filled the space, blending with the gentle clatter of cups being set on the counter. Within minutes, Izuku brought over 2 steaming mugs and set one in front of Aizawa before taking a seat across from him. His expression shifted, becoming more serious, focused, as if sensing the weight behind Aizawa's request. "So, what did you want to ask me?" Izuku's tone was curious, ready for whatever Aizawa had on his mind. Aizawa hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of the coffee cup as he gathered his thoughts. He wasn't one to ask for help often, more like never, let alone make requests like this. But the incident a few days ago had made him realize something: his approach to taking care of himself might not always be the best. "I wanted to ask," Aizawa started slowly, eyes locking onto Izuku's. "If you could teach me how to do sutures." Izuku blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected that. Of all the things Aizawa could have asked him, this was far from what he'd imagined. Did he hear that correctly? Sutures? Izuku repeated, his expression quickly shifting from curiosity to something more serious, more concerned. Aizawa nodded. "It's a useful skill for the field. Could save time in certain situations." He shrugged, sipping on his coffee. Izuku's face darkened slightly, and he set his coffee down, leaning forward. "Absolutely not." His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes, deep emeralds darkening in an instant. Aizawa raised an eyebrow at the firm refusal. "Why not?" Izuku sighed, running a hand through his green hair. "Aizawa, it's almost prejudicial for me to teach you that. If I show you how to suture, you'll just start doing it yourself. And I don't want you stitching yourself up alone, not when you could come to me for help." Aizawa frowned, not used to being on the receiving end of such blunt concern. "I'm perfectly capable of handling it." "No, you're not," Izuku interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "You're a hero, not a medic. And just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. I don't want you risking more damage by trying to fix things on your own." Aizawa sat back, feeling a strange mix of frustration and something else, something warmer, more unfamiliar. "I don't want to burden you with that." Izuku's eyes softened, and he shook his head. "You're not a burden, Aizawa. If you ever get hurt, even if I'm in the middle of a night shift, you can call me. I'll help you. Every time." That unexpected admission made something twist in Aizawa's chest, a strange warmth he wasn't prepared to confront. He couldn't quite put a name to it, but it left him feeling unsteady, vulnerable in a way he didn't like. Izuku hesitated for a moment before asking, "Is that all, then?" "Yeah, that's all." He cleared his throat, trying to brush it off. Aizawa stood, feeling that same odd sensation in his chest, and turned toward the door. But before he could leave, Izuku stepped forward and gently squeezed his shoulder. "Take care of yourself, Aizawa," Izuku said softly, his touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. And maybe he's going to regret this, but there was something in his chest that pushed him to talk. "Shouta. Then, please call me Izuku." "Shouta," said the doctor, his smile blinding him. Aizawa nodded, his mind swirling with unfamiliar thoughts as he left the apartment. And, DMN, his name shouldn't have sounded that nice coming from Izuku. The warmth of Izuku's touch stayed with him long after he walked away, like a gentle but insistent reminder of something he couldn't quite ignore. The door closed behind Shouta, and for a moment, Izuku stood frozen in place. His hand still hovered near the doorknob, as if reluctant to move. He hadn't expected the conversation to go quite like that. His eyes drifted to the now empty chair at his kitchen table, the coffee mug Aizawa had left behind still half full. Izuku sighed quietly, rubbing his temple as he tried to shake off the strange tension that lingered in the air. Something warm bubbled in his chest, something about calling Shouta by his first name. It was exciting. He hadn't been angry, exactly, but the sudden protectiveness he felt toward Shouta caught him off guard. He couldn't bear the thought of Aizawa trying to take care of his injuries alone again. Key word, trying. It wasn't just about physical harm, it was the deeper issue of Aizawa isolating himself, even when there were people wanting to help him. With a small shake of his head, Izuku dismissed the thoughts for now. He had other things to focus on. He moved back to his desk, dropping his work bag onto the chair as he began preparing for tomorrow's class with 3A. There were lesson plans to finalize, activities to adjust, and a few quizzes to review. Izuku threw himself into the familiar routine, letting the structure of the work clear his mind of the lingering frustration. Still, despite his best efforts to focus, thoughts of Shouta kept creeping back. Izuku found himself glancing toward the door now and then, replaying their conversation in his head. It wasn't the first time he'd worried about Shouta. From the moment they'd started working together, Izuku noticed the strain the hero put on himself physically and emotionally. But Aizawa was stubborn, and it wasn't easy to get him to accept help. Today had been one of those rare moments where Izuku thought, maybe, just maybe, Aizawa would let someone in. But it was fleeting, and Izuku could feel Aizawa retreating back behind his walls the moment he left. Izuku sighed again, forcing himself to focus. After spending a couple of hours preparing his lesson plan, Izuku glanced at the clock. It was just past noon. He needed sleep. His night shifts at the hospital were draining, and his mind was starting to feel the fatigue, so he needed as much rest as he could get. Izuku stood and stretched, muscles tight from sitting for so long. He made his way to the bathroom, turning on the shower and letting the steam fill the small space. The hot water would help clear his head, he hoped. Maybe it would wash away the strange feeling that had settled in his chest ever since Aizawa left. The water cascaded down his back, soothing his tired muscles, but his mind kept drifting back to Aizawa. He remembered the look on Aizawa's face when he'd said he wanted to learn sutures, his face stoic, but there was something else. Was it vulnerability? Izuku wasn't sure, but he knew it wasn't just a casual request. There was something deeper behind it, and Izuku had shot it down, hard. He wasn't sure if that had been the right move, but the thought of Aizawa stitching himself up, alone and in pain, had been enough to push Izuku's protective instincts into overdrive. As he dried off and changed into navy blue scrubs, layering a black compression shirt underneath, Izuku couldn't help but feel a gnawing sense of guilt. Maybe he'd been too harsh. Maybe there was a better way to explain his concerns to Aizawa without shutting him down so completely. His phone buzzed on the counter, pulling him out of his thoughts. He picked it up and saw a message from Katsuki. Cats. Hey, can we hang out on Saturday? 1804. Cats. I want to tell you SMTH. 1804. Zoo. Sure, you can come to the teacher's building at noon. We can have lunch at my apartment. 1805. Cats. K. 1805. Izuku's eyebrows raised in mild surprise. It wasn't often that Katsuki reached out for casual meetups, and the part where Katsuki wanted to tell him something definitely piqued his curiosity. He stared at the screen for a second before tossing the phone onto his bed. Whatever Katsuki wanted to talk about, it could wait until Saturday. For now, he had other things to deal with. By 9:30, Izuku was out the door, heading toward the hospital for his usual night shift. The drive was brisk, and he had the windows down, the chilly night air helping to clear his mind. As much as he was exhausted, he couldn't afford to let his guard down. The hospital never slowed, and there was always someone in need of care. Once at the hospital, Izuku dove headfirst into his work. Patients needed attention, injuries needed tending to, and paperwork piled up faster than he could keep up with. Yet, no matter how busy he was, thoughts of Aizawa kept creeping into his mind. How could someone so capable of caring for others be so careless with himself? Izuku found it frustrating, infuriating even, that Aizawa couldn't see the harm in pushing himself so hard. But at the same time, Izuku couldn't deny that it was part of what made Aizawa who he was. His stubbornness, his self-reliance, they were traits Izuku admired. But he also saw the danger in them. As the night shift wore on, Izuku's thoughts kept circling back to the moment Aizawa had left his apartment. The warmth in Aizawa's voice, the way his shoulder felt beneath Izuku's hand, it left a mark, one that Izuku couldn't shake. He shook his head, he needed to focus. The apartment was quiet, save for the gentle laughs that came from Eri's room. Shouta sat on the couch, his laptop on his thighs, half-heartedly reading through a report from UA. He'd read the same sentence at least 5 times now but couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to the coffee he'd shared with Izuku earlier. That strange warmth had settled deep in his chest, and he still couldn't quite figure out why. It was frustrating, this unfamiliar sensation. He was used to compartmentalizing, locking things away. But Izuku had a way of pushing past those walls without even trying. The younger man's concern was genuine, unwavering, and it left Aizawa unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to people caring so much, certainly not about him. Before he could sink any further into his tangled thoughts, Eri emerged from her room. She held a piece of paper in her small hands, her expression one of focused concentration. Aizawa watched as she shuffled over to him, climbing up onto the couch beside him with the kind of determination that always made him smile softly. With a small smile, he closed the laptop and set it aside, giving his daughter his full attention. "Look, Papa," Eri said, holding up the paper for him to see. "I drew this for Zoo." Aizawa's gaze softened as he took in the drawing. It was a simple sketch, 3 stick figures holding hands. Eri was in the center, he could tell by the gray hair and the golden horn on the side of her head. Shouta was on the left side, his black hair defying gravity and his eyes bright red. He had his quirk activated. And there he was, to the right side, Izuku. Bright green, messy curls, and a smile. "He'll love it," Aizawa said, his voice a little gruff, though there was no mistaking the affection behind his words. "It's a nice drawing, kiddo." Eri beamed, proud of herself. She settled beside him, resting her head against his arm. "When is Zoo coming back?" Aizawa's brow furrowed slightly at the question. He wasn't sure how to answer. The truth was, he didn't know when or if Izuku would stop by again. He wasn't even sure why the thought bothered him as much as it did. "I'm not sure," Aizawa said after a beat. "But I'm sure he'll visit soon." Eri seemed to accept the answer, though she didn't let the topic drop. "I like when he's here," she said, her voice quiet but thoughtful. "He's nice." Aizawa glanced down at her, surprised by the amount of feelings she put on those words. She wasn't a talkative kid, even before he adopted her, but she seemed to adore Izuku. Eri had always been an observant child, but it was moments like these that reminded him just how much she had grown. "You like him, huh?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Eri nodded, playing with the corner of her drawing. "Yeah. He feels safe." That word safe struck a chord in Aizawa. It wasn't just about Eri feeling secure around Izuku, it was the fact that Izuku had that effect on people. He made them feel protected, cared for, without even realizing it. Aizawa had seen it countless times, firsthand, but hearing it from Eri somehow made it hit deeper. For a moment, he let himself sit with that thought. "He does feel safe, doesn't he?" Aizawa admitted, almost without thinking. The words felt foreign on his tongue, but they weren't a lie. Eri perked up at that, her smile growing wider. "You should ask him to come over more," said the little girl, her smile only growing. "So I can give him my drawing." Aizawa chuckled, ruffling her hair gently. "I'll think about it." Later that night, after tucking Eri into bed, Aizawa found himself staring at the drawing she had made for Izuku. It was sitting on the coffee table, the colors bright even in the dim light of the room. Something about it made him pause. It wasn't just the innocence of the sketch or the fact that Eri clearly liked Izuku, it was the way the drawing seemed to capture a feeling Aizawa hadn't been able to put into words. Safe. Izuku made people feel safe. He had an ability to ease tension, to make people believe that everything would be okay, even when it wasn't. It was a trait Aizawa had always admired in him, but he hadn't realized just how much it had come to mean to him personally. He ran a hand through his hair, leaning back against the couch. His mind wandered back to their conversation earlier, Izuku's firm refusal. At the time, it had been frustrating, but now, with a little distance, Aizawa could see it for what it was. Izuku wasn't trying to control him or undermine his independence. He was protecting him. In his own way, Izuku was trying to keep him safe. A strange warmth settled in Aizawa's chest, similar to the feeling he'd had when Izuku touched his shoulder earlier. It was unsettling but not unpleasant. It made him realize something he hadn't been willing to face before. The feeling fell to his gut, an uncomfortable warmth bubbling in his stomach like boiling water. He trusted Izuku. More than that, he wanted Izuku to be around, not just for Eri, not just for Hitoshi, but for himself. The realization was enough to make Aizawa's heart beat a little faster, though he quickly tried to brush it off. There were more important things to worry about. He couldn't afford to get lost in feelings he didn't want to understand. Saturdays are so calm, especially because Izuku doesn't have to teach a class full of teenagers after coming back from his shift in the hospital. Instead, he can indulge in some sleep. And, of course, Izuku will grab any sleep he can get his hands on. Right now, though, he is in his kitchen, preparing lunch. The sun is shining at its highest point, casting a golden glow across his apartment. The warmth outside mirrors the warmth within, the aroma of cooking fills the air, the soft simmer of vegetables blending with the comforting clinks of plates and utensils. Just as he stirs the pot on the stove, a knock echoes through the apartment. Izuku straightens, wiping his hands on a towel before making his way to the door. Opening it, he's greeted by the sight of Katsuki, standing with his usual scowl but a subtle ease to his stance that speaks of familiarity. His sharp, crimson eyes scan the apartment, taking in the coziness as if it's a foreign land. The blonde is wearing baggy jeans and a black shirt with a white skull. Yo, Katsuki mutters, hands stuffed into the pockets of his jeans. Cats. Izuku greets him with a warm smile, stepping aside to let his friend in. You're right on time. I was just finishing up. Katsuki steps in, his gaze flicking to the kitchen, where a pot and a pan are neatly arranged. He wrinkles his nose, not at the smell but at the domesticity of it all. Seriously? You're already playing house, huh? Katsuki raises an eyebrow, though his tone lacks the bite it once held. There's a certain lightness to his words now, something far less hostile than it used to be. Izuku laughs, unfazed. I've got to eat, Katsuki. Besides, it's not like you're here for a gourmet meal. Just a nice lunch with an old friend, right? Katsuki snorts, making his way to the small dining table. Yeah. Just don't burn the DMN food. Izuku shakes his head, returning to the stove to stir the pot once more. He glances over his shoulder at Katsuki, who's now leaning back in one of the chairs, his arms crossed, legs stretched out. For a moment, the image strikes Izuku how different he is now, how much he's grown. It's nice, though, Katsuki mutters, his voice quieter than before. Hanging out again. It's been 2 DMN long. Izuku freezes for a split second, the unexpected vulnerability in Katsuki's words catching him off guard. He turns back to the stove, giving the food a final stir before switching off the heat. Yeah, Izuku says, his tone softer now. It has been. I missed this. Katsuki doesn't respond immediately, but his gaze shifts, watching Izuku as he sets the table. He sets a hot plate in front of him, rice with a breaded pork cutlet cooked in fried onions and a scrambled egg. Izuku's favorite food, katsudon. When Izuku finally joins him, sitting across from him with a casual smile, Katsuki grumbles under his breath, almost as if he's uncomfortable with the emotional direction of the conversation. Well, it's not like I had much time to miss you, nerd. I've been busy. Izuku laughs lightly, sensing the awkwardness but appreciating the sentiment behind the words. Yeah, I know. You've been doing great, though. I can't believe how much you've changed, Kats. Katsuki's sharp eyes meet Izuku's, a flicker of something crossing his face before he shrugs. That's what therapy does to you. And he takes a spoonful of food into his mouth. Izuku blinks, genuinely surprised. Therapy wasn't something he'd ever imagined Katsuki seeking out. He knew Katsuki had his own way of dealing with things, but this... Therapy? Izuku repeats, curiosity seeping into his voice. I didn't know you were going to therapy, Katsuki. The blonde rolls his eyes, leaning back in his chair as if bracing himself for a longer conversation than he'd planned. Yeah, well. I don't go broadcasting it, nerd. But it's helped. The clink of their utensils fades into a comfortable silence as they finish most of their meal, the room settling into a cozy lull. Katsuki sets his spoon down and leans back in his chair, his crimson eyes focused on the half-empty plate in front of him, deep in thought. Izuku, picking up on the shift in the atmosphere, stays quiet, letting the moment breathe. Katsuki's fingers drum against the table, the rhythm steady, like he's gathering his thoughts. Izuku doesn't push him to speak. He knows Katsuki has his own pace when it comes to talking about feelings. Instead, he quietly sips his water, waiting. Finally, after what feels like minutes, Katsuki breaks the silence. You remember the sports festival? When I was a first year. His voice is low, more subdued than usual. Izuku looks up from his glass, nodding slowly. Yeah, of course. I watched you on TV, you were incredible, Katsuki. Katsuki scoffs, shaking his head. Incredible, huh? Is that what you'd call it? Being paraded around like a DMN animal. His tone is sharp, but it lacks its usual bite. It's more, weary. Izuku's brow furrows in confusion until the memory clicks the moment during the awards ceremony when Katsuki, bound in chains, had a muzzle clamped over his mouth, his face twisted in rage as he was forced to stand there. The image always unsettled Izuku, but he hadn't realized how much it affected Katsuki himself. I hated that, Katsuki admits, his gaze hard and distant, locked onto something only he can see. Standing there, feeling like I'd lost control of everything. My quirk, my anger, myself. He clenches his fists on the table, his knuckles widening. It wasn't just that moment, though. It was everything leading up to it, the constant feeling that no matter what I did, I wasn't good enough. I felt like everyone was underestimating me. Stupid half and half didn't use his full quirk during our fight and Birdhead didn't even try. I was just angry. Izuku's heart aches at the admission, but he doesn't interrupt. He can see how hard this is for Katsuki, and the last thing he wants to do is make it any harder. Something grabs his heart and squeezes it dry, weighting on his chest in a painful way. This boy, the boy he sees as his little brother, the little boy who pushed through everything and has always been amazing at everything he put his mind into. He was hurt. It got worse after that, Katsuki continues, his voice quieter now. I didn't talk about it, but I felt humiliated. Like everything I'd been working for was meaningless if I couldn't even control myself. And I didn't want that. He glances up at Izuku, his eyes softening just a fraction. I didn't want to be that person anymore. Izuku nods slowly, his voice gentle when he finally speaks. So, that's when you started going to therapy? Katsuki lets out a breath, his shoulders relaxing a little. Not right away. At first, I didn't give a DMN. Thought I could just power through it, like I did with everything else. But then, Hound Dog talked to me. Hound Dog? Izuku echoes, surprised. He knew Hound Dog was the school's guidance counselor, but aside from that, he hadn't talked much to the canine hero. Yeah, Katsuki says with a grunt. He's been through his own sheet, and he told me he understood what it's like to have that kind of anger. To feel like it's controlling you. He didn't sugarcoat it or act like I was some DMN victim. He just said therapy could help. Katsuki's lips twitch into something like a bitter smile. At first, I thought it was bullshit. But I was sick of feeling like I couldn't control myself. So I gave it a shot. Izuku leans forward slightly, his green eyes wide with admiration. And it helped? Katsuki shrugs, his expression neutral, but there's a vulnerability in his gaze that wasn't there before. Yeah. Not at first, but over time, I started noticing it. I didn't blow up at every little thing, didn't feel like I was walking around with a weight on my chest all the DMN time. I could breathe, you know. Izuku nods, a soft smile forming on his lips. I'm proud of you, Katsuki. It takes a lot to do that, to face that part of yourself and want to change. Katsuki looks away, a faint blush dusting his cheeks. TCH, don't get all sappy on me, nerd. But the usual harshness in his voice isn't there. They fall into silence again, but this time, it's comfortable. The air between them feels lighter, more open, as if the conversation has allowed them to close a gap that had been lingering for too long. The clatter of dishes fills the silence as Izuku collects their plates, moving them to the sink. Katsuki leans back in his chair, watching him for a moment before clearing his throat. His usual scowl returns, but it's softer, as though he's trying to mask something deeper. The kitchen was quiet, the sound of water running from the faucet the only noise as Izuku washed their dishes. Katsuki sat at the table, palms resting on his knees, staring at the floor as if lost in thought. The usual sharpness in his expression was dulled, replaced by something heavier. Izuku glanced over his shoulder. Kats, you okay? Katsuki grunted in response, folding his arms across his chest. Yeah. Just, something's been eating at me. Izuku turned off the faucet, wiping his hands on a towel. He knew Katsuki well enough to recognize when something was truly bothering him. After all, they'd been friends more like brothers since Katsuki was born. The hot-headed, brash exterior Katsuki usually put up didn't fool him. Do you want to talk about it? Izuku asked, walking over and taking a seat across from him. He didn't push, knowing Katsuki would get to it in his own time. Katsuki took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as if bracing himself. You remember how you've always said that All Might was your hero? The guy who made you want to save people? Izuku smiled softly at the memory. Of course. All Might is an inspiration. He's the reason I became a teacher. Why? Katsuki shifted uncomfortably in his seat, running a hand through his messy blonde hair. Yeah, well, there's something no one knows about him. About his quirk. Izuku blinked, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean? All Might's quirk? I thought it was a strength quirk, right? Katsuki's lips twisted into a half-scowl. It's more complicated than that. His quirk isn't like others. It's not something he was born with. It's something called One for All. Izuku frowned, confused. One for All? What kind of quirk is that? Katsuki exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. It's a quirk that can be passed down from one person to another. It's not just a quirk, it's a legacy. Each user inherits the power of the previous one, so it gets stronger with every new successor. That's why All Might was so DMN powerful. Izuku's eyes widened in shock. A quirk that can be passed down? I've never heard of anything like that. Of course you haven't, Katsuki muttered. It's been kept secret for a reason. Only a handful of people know about it. Izuku processed this new information slowly, his mind racing. All Might's incredible strength. It wasn't just his own. It was the result of generations of power being passed down and building up over time. The implications of that were staggering. So, All Might wasn't born with it? Izuku asked, still trying to wrap his head around it. No, Katsuki replied, his voice quieter than usual. He got it from his predecessor. And now, he's passed it on again. Izuku's eyes snapped to Katsuki, a realization dawning on him. Wait, you don't mean? Katsuki clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. Yeah. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. Katsuki. All Might chose you to carry that legacy? Katsuki scoffed, his usual bravado creeping back into his voice. Yeah. Chose me to carry this DMN thing. To be the next symbol of peace or whatever. He ran a hand through his hair again, clearly agitated. The old man said I had what it takes. But I don't know, Zu. Izuku stared at him, feeling a surge of emotions all at once. Pride, awe, and concern. He knew how much All Might meant to Katsuki, how much becoming a hero had always been his goal. But now that the responsibility had been placed on his shoulders, Izuku could see the weight of it bearing down on him. But Katsuki. If All Might thinks you're worthy, then you are. He saw something in you that made him believe you could handle it. Izuku said quietly. Katsuki's face tightened, his usual scowl deepening. Yeah, well, it doesn't feel like I'm worthy sometimes. This quirk. It's not like anything I've ever had to deal with. It's a responsibility. And I hate that it's not just about power anymore. It's about living up to this ridiculous legacy. Izuku frowned, his heart aching for his friend. He understood now why Katsuki had been acting more distant lately, more burdened. It's a lot to take on, Katsuki. But you've never backed down from a challenge before. This isn't like the usual crap, Zu, Katsuki snapped, though there was no real venom behind his words. It's not just about being strong. I'm supposed to be a symbol of peace, like All Might. And what if I can't live up to that? What if I fail? Izuku shook his head, his voice steady and firm. You won't fail. I've known you since you were born, Katsuki. You've always been strong, but more than that, you've got the heart of a hero. All Might didn't just choose you because of your power. He chose you because you care. You care about people more than you let on. Izuku's gaze softened as he saw his childhood friend, his little brother, in front of him. Besides, and it might sound strange, you don't have to be a symbol of peace, added Izuku, taking another sip of water. Eh? Yeah, you don't have to be a symbol of peace, you can be a symbol of something else: victory, perseverance, strength. You name it. You can be a symbol of something that fits you and model that legacy to your liking, proposed the young doctor. Katsuki's jaw tightened, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a new light in his eyes. Maybe, he muttered. But it doesn't change the fact that I feel like I'm carrying a mountain on my back. Izuku smiled gently. You don't have to carry it alone. I'm here, and I always will be. You're like a brother to me, Katsuki. And you're not alone in this. Katsuki glanced at him, a brief moment of gratitude flashing across his face before he grunted and turned away. TCH, you're always so DMN sentimental. But thanks, Zu. Izuku chuckled softly. You know I mean it. And you know I'm proud of you. The hospital was cold. Izuku hugged himself. Even if he had the compression shirt warming him up, the hospital was still very cold. It wasn't just the temperature either, it was the stillness of the early morning that made it feel almost unnatural. The halls were dimly lit, with only the faint hum of machines breaking the silence. Even the usual shuffle of nurses was muffled, as if the whole building had sunk into a deep, tired lull. The clock on the wall read 4:12 a.m. The kind of time when minutes bled into hours, and Izuku had to fight to keep his mind sharp. He glanced at the patient files in front of him, rubbing his eyes as the words blurred slightly from exhaustion. These late shifts always crept up on him, even after years of working them. Just 3 more hours, he thought, trying to muster a little more energy. Suddenly, a burst of noise shattered the quiet. The loud sound of the ER doors, the rapid, panicked footsteps of paramedics, and the urgent hum of voices. Izuku was instantly on high alert, snapping into focus as the faint echoes reached his ears. Dr. Midoriya, a nurse called, voice strained. We've got a trauma incoming, severe accident, motorcycle versus truck. ETA, 2 minutes. Izuku's heart skipped a beat as he hurried to the ER bay, wiping his hands on his scrubs. He could already hear the fast approaching commotion from the paramedics. He glanced at the monitor displays, his mind automatically running through the possible scenarios. The paramedics rushed through the door, pushing a stretcher with a man who couldn't have been much older than 35. Blood soaked his clothes, pooling around his abdomen. Even with the severity of his wounds, the man's face was still. We've got a John Doe, late 30s, involved in a collision with a truck. Multiple contusions, fractured ribs, possible internal bleeding, suspected spleen rupture, one of the paramedics rattled off as they transferred the patient to the hospital bed. Blood pressures dropping, pulses weak. Izuku stepped forward, his eyes quickly scanning the patient. The man's skin was pale, his breathing shallow, and the blood spilling from his abdomen was soaking through the layers of gauze the paramedics had hastily applied. Get him to the ER now. I'll scrub in. Izuku ordered, his voice sharp but calm. The medical team sprang into action, wheeling the patient toward the operating room, speeding the prep time. Izuku grabbed his phone, dialing UA's principal, Nedzu, with practiced efficiency. It rang twice before the familiar, high-pitched voice picked up. Midoriya? You do realize it's 4 in the morning, don't you? Nedzu's voice was a mix of amusement and concern. I'm sorry to call at this hour, Izuku began, glancing at the clock again as they approached the OR. But there's an emergency surgery I need to scrub in 4. It's going to take a few hours severe trauma. I just wanted to inform you in case I'm delayed for morning classes. Nedzu's voice softened. Understood, Midoriya. Take your time, focus on your patient. We'll adjust the schedule if necessary. Thank you, Izuku replied, his focus already shifting back to the situation at hand. He quickly hung up, tossing his phone into his locker before thoroughly washing his hands and scrubbing in for surgery. With the help of a nurse, he pulled on his gloves and surgical mask. He pushed through the swinging doors into the OR, the sterile, bright environment a sharp contrast to the dim, quiet hospital hallways. The surgical team was already in place, prepping the patient, who was now hooked up to monitors showing alarmingly low vital signs. The other surgeon on call, Dr. Takahashi, gave Izuku a curt nod as he approached. Midoriya, we've got a ruptured spleen, massive internal bleeding. Fractured ribs likely caused secondary damage. He's unstable. We need to act fast. Izuku stepped up to the operating table, eyes locking on the patient's pale, sweat-soaked face. The man was barely there, hooked up to multiple monitors. Blood pressure dangerously low, pulse weak and erratic. Time was against them. We're losing him if we don't get in there now, Izuku muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Suction, and let's open him up. The scalpel sliced through skin, revealing the torn flesh and blood beneath. Izuku's mind clicked into focus, the world narrowing down to just the patient and the procedure. His hands moved methodically, with practiced precision, cutting away the damaged tissue while the nurses worked around him to keep the area clear. The ruptured spleen was a mess, torn beyond immediate repair. Blood was pooling in the abdominal cavity, soaking the surgical field. Izuku felt a tight knot form in his chest as he worked. They had to stop the bleeding fast. Clamp, he ordered, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline coursing through him. One of the assisting nurses handed him the instrument, and Izuku swiftly clamped the artery, momentarily stemming the tide of blood. But the damage was severe more than just the spleen. As they worked, Izuku noticed several ribs were shattered, and fragments had pierced the surrounding tissue. He glanced at Dr. Takahashi, who was focusing on repairing the spleen. We need to clean this up, Izuku said, nodding to the scattered fragments. There's too much internal damage. If we don't stabilize him soon, he's going into shock. For nearly 4.5 hours, the team worked tirelessly, cleaning out debris, repairing damaged blood vessels, and trying to keep the patient stable. Izuku's hands moved quickly and efficiently as they pieced the man back together, one damaged organ at a time. But with every passing minute, the task seemed to grow heavier. The pressure in the room was suffocating. The beeping of the monitors grew more erratic, and Izuku's mind raced through every option, every possible solution. He was in control until he wasn't. Just as they tied the last knot, closing the incision, the patient's heart monitor let out a shrill, high-pitched tone. A sound Izuku knew all too well. He froze for a split second, eyes darting to the screen as the heart rate flatlined. Code Blue, one of the nurses shouted, but Izuku was already moving, his chest tightening with dread. Defib, now! Dr. Takahashi barked, and the crash cart was wheeled over in seconds. Izuku grabbed the paddles, his hands shaking slightly as he pressed them against the patient's chest. Clear, he shouted, sending a jolt of electricity through the man's body. The patient jerked on the table, but the monitor stayed flat. Again. Another shock. Another jolt. Still nothing. The flatline was a scream in the silence of the OR, its constant, unforgiving tone filling the room. Come on. Come on. Izuku muttered under his breath, his heart hammering in his chest. They tried again. And again. The shocks grew desperate, each one harder to deliver as the minutes dragged on. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Takahashi stepped back, his eyes dark. It's over, Midoriya, he said quietly. He's gone. Izuku stood there, staring at the lifeless body on the table, the paddles still in his hands. His entire body felt numb, his mind refusing to accept what had just happened. Gone. The word echoed in his head, hollow and cold. His hands fell to his sides, and a deep, aching emptiness settled in his chest. He had done everything but it wasn't enough. Slowly, Izuku peeled off his gloves, feeling the weight of the loss sink in. He barely registered the murmured condolences from the other doctors as he left the OR, heading straight for the locker room. His limbs felt heavy as he pulled off his scrubs, his fingers trembling slightly as he removed the hair cap. It wasn't the first patient who had died on his table. But it never got easier. Every single one of them left a scar, another mark on his soul that never quite healed. Izuku stared at his reflection in the locker room mirror, his face pale and drawn, dark circles under his eyes from too many sleepless nights. Without thinking, he grabbed his things and headed out of the hospital, walking through the darkened parking lot until he reached his car. The sun was beginning to rise, casting an eerie light across the horizon, but Izuku barely noticed. His mind was still in the ore, replaying the final moments over and over again, the sound of the flatline ringing in his ears. He slid into the driver's seat, starting the engine with a sigh. Classes at UA started soon. He glanced at the clock. 8:45 a.m. Classes have already started, so he may just arrive late. The drive back to UA was a blur. The road seemed to stretch on endlessly, the morning light washing everything in pale, lifeless hues. Izuku's body moved on autopilot, turning the wheel, shifting gears, all while his mind remained frozen. When he finally arrived at UA, the clock read 9:03 a.m. Izuku parked and stepped out, his black scrubs wrinkled, and his white coat still draped over his shoulders. He didn't have the energy to go to his apartment and leave his things. He felt drained, hollow. His only goal now was to get through the day. As Izuku entered the teacher's lounge, the door creaked open, its sound echoing slightly in the otherwise quiet room. Hisashi was sitting on his desk, going through a magazine, and Shouta was fake napping inside his bright yellow sleeping bag. Hisashi's eyes widened at the sight of Izuku. "Morning, Izuku." His words faltered as he took in the full extent of Izuku's disheveled appearance. The usual spark in Izuku's eyes was missing, replaced by a hollow, distant gaze. Izuku barely acknowledged Hisashi's greeting, offering a low, almost mechanical hum in response. His eyes were downcast, and he moved with a deliberate slowness, as if every step was a tremendous effort. He made a beeline for his desk, ignoring the concerned glances from Hisashi. Shouta looked at him from where he lies on the couch. Shouta's frown deepened. He had seen Izuku in many states, but this was different. The usual warmth and determination were absent, replaced by an aura of grim detachment. Shouta exchanged a glance with Hisashi, who looked equally worried. Izuku left his work bag on the desk and grabbed his folder for class with shaky hands, his fingers lingering on the edge of the desk as if trying to anchor himself. "I'm fine," he said softly, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just had a rough night." Hisashi's concern was palpable, but he knew better than to press too hard. "Do you need anything before you head to class?" Izuku shook his head, avoiding eye contact. "No, I'm good. I just need to focus." With that, he left the lounge and made his way to his classroom. The corridor seemed longer than usual, the muted colors of the walls blending into a sea of monotony. Each step felt heavier, as though he were trudging through a fog. Entering the classroom, Izuku set his folder on the desk and took a deep breath. The students were settling in, their murmurs growing softer as they noticed their teacher's arrival. He gave them a faint smile, trying to muster some semblance of normalcy. The lesson began with Izuku's voice steady, but there was a subtle flatness to his tone. He spoke about emergency response, his words deliberate but lacking their usual enthusiasm. The students listened attentively, but some exchanged worried glances, sensing the shift in their teacher's demeanor. As the class continued, Izuku's mind was a chaotic whirlwind of the morning's events. He moved through the lesson with precision, but it was clear he was using the work to distract himself from the emotional weight pressing down on him. The routine motions of teaching, the familiar rhythm of his lecture, provided a temporary escape from the haunting memories of the operating room. The bell rang, signaling the end of the class. Izuku gathered his things with mechanical efficiency, his movements robotic. The students filtered out, casting one last concerned look at their teacher before leaving. As Izuku stood alone in the empty classroom, the weight of his grief seemed to settle more heavily on his shoulders. He took a deep breath, trying to steel himself for the day ahead, knowing that the next class, the next patient, and the next challenge awaited him. It took him no time to go back to the teacher's lounge, grab his bag, and run to his apartment. Later that day, the sun had fully risen, casting a harsh light over the city as it went about its routine. Shouta was giving a lecture on heroics and hero laws when the bell rang. As the class ended, Hisashi's message buzzed on Shouta's phone. Loud blonde. "Hey, Shou. 11:34. Loud blonde. Can you check on Izuku please? 11:34. Loud blonde. I have the feeling that SMTH is wrong him. 11:35. Shouta. K. 11:35. Shouta's eyes narrowed in concern. Hisashi's intuition was usually spot on, and the urgency in the texts was palpable. He glanced around at his students, who were chattering as they left the classroom, and decided to check on Izuku immediately. Arriving at Izuku's apartment, Shouta noticed the door was ajar, a subtle but troubling sign. He pushed it open slowly, the creak of the hinges echoing in the quiet hallway. The inside of the apartment was eerily still, the usual bustle of Izuku's life replaced by an unsettling calm. "Izuku?" Shouta called softly as he stepped inside, the shadows of the late morning stretching across the floor. There was no response, only the faint hum of the refrigerator. He followed the sound of shallow breathing to the living room and found Izuku sitting on the floor, his back resting against the wall. The scene before him was one of utter desolation. Izuku's eyes were glassy and vacant, his posture slumped as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. The sight struck Shouta deeply, a pang of worry lancing through him. Shouta approached cautiously, taking a seat beside Izuku. The silence between them was heavy, laden with an unspoken understanding of the gravity of the situation. He reached out, placing a gentle hand on Izuku's shoulder. "What's going on?" Shouta's voice was soft but firm, his concern palpable. Izuku's composure, so carefully maintained throughout the morning, shattered in an instant. His eyes, which had been so hollow and distant, now brimmed with unshed tears. A shuddering breath escaped him, and he whispered, "He died. I let him die on that cold table." The words, so heavy with guilt and grief, seemed to hang in the air. As if a dam had burst, Izuku's tears flowed freely, his body trembling with the force of his sobs. His face flushed crimson, eyes squeezed shut as fat tears rolled down his cheeks, dropping onto the floor below. The crying was raw and visceral, each sob racking his body and making him gasp for air between the relentless waves of grief. Shouta watched, his heart aching with each sound of Izuku's pain. The sight of Izuku's face, contorted in anguish, was heartbreaking. He saw Izuku's face get redder, his button nose covered in snot and red from being scrubbed by the sleeve of the white coat he was wearing. In that moment, Shouta saw Izuku vulnerable and beautiful. Without a second thought, Shouta moved closer, his arms wrapping around Izuku in a tight embrace. The action was instinctive, driven by a deep desire to protect. Shouta wasn't naturally affectionate, but he held Izuku with a firmness that spoke thousands of words, promises of support and understanding. Izuku's sobs gradually lessened as Shouta held him close, the rhythm of his breathing slowing. Shouta could feel the dampness of Izuku's tears seeping through his shirt. He remained solid, his arms an anchor in the storm of emotions. The intensity of Izuku's breakdown began to ebb, exhaustion taking its toll. As the minutes passed, Izuku's sobs grew quieter, the tears slowing to a trickle. His body, once tense with anguish, now seemed to relax into Shouta's embrace. Shouta could feel the weight of Izuku's head resting on his shoulder, the exhaustion evident in the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. Shouta continued to hold Izuku, his own heart aching with a mixture of sadness and relief. It was a moment of profound connection, one where words felt inadequate. He simply held on, providing a steady presence in the midst of Izuku's turmoil. He felt Izuku's hands hold onto his shirt, his arms coiled around his waist firmly. Eventually, Izuku's breathing evened out, the sounds of his sobs giving way to a quiet, almost imperceptible snore. Shouta held him until he fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, the weight of the day's events catching up with him. And Shouta was just a man, a weak man that just needed a nap. He rested his head over Izuku's, closing his eyes and leaning into sleep's embrace. The simple act of holding someone in their darkest hour was a powerful form of support, and Shouta was determined to offer that to Izuku. As the afternoon sun began to cast long shadows across the room, Izuku slept comfortably on Shouta's chest. He feels stiff when he opens his eyes. His butt hurts, like he's been sitting on the same chair for a while. The ache stretches from his lower back to his legs, a dull throb settling in his joints. Grogginess clings to him like a heavy blanket, the world around him blurry as he tries to make sense of his surroundings. The first thing he registers is warmth. Not just any warmth, the kind that radiates from another person, steady and comforting. Izuku shifts slightly, and his cheek brushes against something soft yet firm. His breath catches. There's a heartbeat beneath his ear, slow and rhythmic, a constant thump that grounds him in the present. He blinks, eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light of his apartment. The air smells faintly of rain, like the windows were left cracked open, but there's something else, an earthy scent mixed with the detergent from a well-worn shirt. He breathes it in deeply, the scent tethering him further to the moment. It's earthy, and it smells weirdly like the inside of his wardrobe, like wood and floral detergent. It's a little musky too, like how Izuku's shirts smell while he uses them, but it's quite nice too. And, weirdly enough, it's quite human too. Slowly, with trembling hands, he pushes himself up, realizing that his head was resting on Shouta's chest. His heart stutters at the realization, a mix of embarrassment and something warmer pooling in his chest. How did he get here? Izuku's brows knit together as the confusion swirls, but then, like a sudden tidal wave, it all comes rushing back. The night shift at the hospital. The patient flatlining. The sterile smell of the ore clinging to his skin. And then. Shouta. The way he had broken down in Shouta's arms, sobbing uncontrollably, all of his defenses shattered under the weight of exhaustion and guilt. He had cried, not just cried broken, like a dam collapsing under pressure. He had fallen apart. The shame creeps up his spine, curling like cold fingers around his throat. He'd never cried in front of anyone like that before. Never. Not even in med school, when the work was just too much, and he was running on less and less sleep, and he had more and more things to do. When he'd cry himself to sleep at night and wake up stiff with a pen-shaped mark on his cheek. He didn't cry in front of anyone, that was for himself and only himself. Izuku scrambles to sit up fully, careful not to jostle Shouta too much. But it's too late, even the smallest movement has already stirred him. Shouta's breathing shifts, a soft groan leaving his lips as he begins to wake. His eyelids flutter open, dark lashes framing bleary eyes, still heavy with sleep. Izuku holds his breath, frozen for a moment, hoping Shouta will just go back to sleep, but then. Izuku. Shouta's voice is low, gravelly from disuse, and something about the way his name sounds in that deep timbre makes Izuku's heart trip over itself. Are you feeling okay? The words hang in the air between them, and Izuku's chest tightens, his heart slamming hard against his ribcage. It's as though Shouta's simple question lays him bare, leaving no room to hide the tangled mess of emotions churning inside him. His throat feels tight, but he forces himself to nod, knowing full well that Shouta can see right through him. I'm okay, Izuku manages to say, his voice raspier than he intends. His fingers twist into the fabric of his sweatpants, gripping tightly as if to anchor himself. Shouta doesn't buy it. Of course, he doesn't. Do you want to talk about it? Shouta asks, his voice still soft, though now with more clarity. His dark eyes search Izuku's face, not pushing, but patient, waiting for the answer. Izuku knows he doesn't have much of a choice. If he refuses, Shouta will just sit there, wait him out, offering silent understanding until Izuku gives in. That's how he is quiet but so stubborn. So, Izuku exhales, long and slow, before he starts to speak. Last night, he begins, his voice shakier than he wants it to be. During my shift. I had a patient. John Doe. He came in for emergency surgery. He was run over by a truck, had a bad wound on his abdomen and the EMTs suspected a ruptured spleen. It should have been fine. We got him prepped, and everything went smoothly. I mean, I was exhausted, but I've done worse surgeries with less sleep. He can feel his heartbeat in his throat, the memories of the night replaying in his mind as if it were happening all over again. The sterile lights of the operating room, the sound of the monitors beeping, the surgical team moving around him in a blur. It had all gone perfectly, right up until the moment it hadn't. Izuku swallows hard. We finished the surgery, closed him up, and just as I was taking off my gloves, he flatlined. We tried everything. CPR, defibrillator. But he was gone. His voice cracks, and Izuku drops his gaze to the floor, unable to meet Shouta's eyes. He died. Just like that. Right after I thought I'd saved him. The room feels suffocatingly quiet, the weight of Izuku's words settling over them both. He can't bring himself to look at Shouta, not yet. His hands shake as he continues. I hate it. I hate when they die like that, on a cold table, alone. He inhales sharply, trying to steady himself, but the grief lingers, clinging to his chest like a vice. No one deserves to die like that. For a moment, there's silence. Then Shouta speaks, his voice rougher now, quieter. I understand. The guilt. Izuku blinks, finally lifting his head to meet Shouta's gaze. The sadness in Shouta's eyes is unmistakable, old wounds that never quite healed visible behind them. Oboro Shirakumo, Shouta says, the name heavy with the weight of memory. He was my best friend. Hisashi's too. We all went to UA together. In our third year, Oboro and I were doing our work study at the same agency. Shouta pauses, his jaw tightening, eyes growing distant. There was a big villain attack. A building collapsed. Oboro. He didn't make it. A piece of the building fell right in front of us. I was so scared, I froze. It fell on him. I couldn't do anything. I just stood there. Watching. Izuku's breath catches, his heart sinking as he listens to Shouta's story. The pain in his voice, though quiet, is palpable. For some reason, he decides to lean his head on Shouta's shoulder, just listening to what he has to say. I blamed myself for a long time, Shouta continues, his voice barely above a whisper. Still do, sometimes. But the truth is, sometimes things are out of our control. No matter how much we want to save everyone, we can't. And it's never easy to accept that. Izuku feels something break inside him, like a dam releasing all the feelings he's been holding back for so long. The guilt, the helplessness, the anger at himself for not being able to do more. It all rushes to the surface, too strong to keep buried any longer. I had a patient once, Izuku says after a long moment of silence. Haruma Kitagawa. 26, liver cancer, stage 2. I was 24, fresh out of med school, and he was my first solo surgery. It was supposed to be a straightforward procedure removing a small tumor. Less than 2 centimeters in diameter. Izuku clenches his hands into fists, his nails biting into his palms as the memories flood back. But when we opened him up, there were more tumors than we thought. One was blocking a major artery. He bled out on the table. I scrubbed my hands so hard after that surgery that they started bleeding. He shows Shouta his hands, the light scars running from his wrists to the first knuckles of his thumbs. They're barely visible now, but Shouta notices them immediately. His gaze softens as he traces the faint scars with his fingertips. The contact was so soft, yet Izuku's heart did a cartwheel in his chest. He lowers his hands and grips the soft fabric of his sweatpants. Izuku swallows the lump in his throat. I couldn't stop. I scrubbed them raw. I was so angry at myself for failing him, for not seeing the signs earlier. I thought, if I just scrubbed hard enough, I could wash away the guilt. Shouta doesn't say anything, but the understanding in his eyes speaks louder than words. Izuku takes a shaky breath, his fingers loosening their grip on his pants. He feels exposed, vulnerable in a way he hasn't felt in years, but right now, it doesn't feel so terrifying. Then, as if some dam has broken, Izuku continues. Kokona Hashimoto. She was 8 years old. Pancreatic cancer. Very complicated surgery. She was always smiling, even when things got bad. I thought if anyone could beat the odds, it would be her. His voice breaks, and tears begin to form in his eyes. But she didn't. She died last year. And her parents. They thanked me. They thanked me after she died, because I was the only surgeon crazy enough to try to perform that surgery. The tears come freely now, spilling over before Izuku can stop them. His shoulders shake, the sobs tearing their way out of him. She was just a kid, Shouta. She didn't deserve to die. None of them did. Without hesitation, Shouta pulls Izuku into a hug, strong and grounding. Izuku crumples into the embrace, burying his face in Shouta's chest as the flood of emotions consumes him. Shouta's arms are solid around him, a steady anchor in the storm, holding him together when everything else feels like it's falling apart. You're not alone, Shouta whispers, his hand gently stroking the back of Izuku's head. You're not alone in this. Izuku clings to him tighter, the weight of his grief slowly easing with each passing second, replaced by a sense of warmth and safety that he hasn't felt in so long. And for the first time in what feels like an eternity, Izuku allows himself to believe those words. As Shouta watches Izuku's pensive expression soften, he checks the time on his phone. It's past 2 p.m. Clearing his throat, he shifts in his seat, breaking the silence. It's already afternoon. You should eat something, he says, his knees popping when he gets up from the hard floor. Izuku glances up, his tired eyes meeting Shouta's. I'll make lunch for us. Izuku shook his head, making the work of getting up from the floor too. No, you've already done enough by coming here. Let me cook. It'll give me something to focus on. Shouta raises an eyebrow but doesn't argue. It's like he just knows not to argue with him. All right, but I'm helping. Izuku stands and moves to the kitchen, methodical in his actions. He grabs a bag of rice from the pantry and fills a pot with water, setting it on the stove. His fingers trace the edge of the pot as he reflects for a moment. Rice and curry sound good, he asks, his movements robotic, as if he knew the steps by heart. His clothes are wrinkled and his hair is a mess, but so is Shouta, so he doesn't comment on it. Sounds perfect. He washes the rice carefully, the clear water turning cloudy as it runs through his fingers. He repeats the process until the water is clear, his movements slow and deliberate, setting the rice on the stove to cook. Izuku continues by taking a cutting board from a drawer and a sharp knife from the cutlery drawer. My mom taught me how to cook when I was young. During med school, I cooked a lot. It helped when things got hard, said Izuku absent-mindedly. He began to set some vegetables on the kitchen counter, next to the cutting board. Shouta watches, a quiet curiosity in his gaze. He moves to the counter, picking up the knife and the vegetables Izuku placed beside him and begins to chop. I see. The curry pot hisses as Izuku turns on the heat. He reaches for the curry cubes and places them on the counter, while Shouta starts chopping the carrots and potatoes into neat pieces. The rhythm of the knife on the cutting board fills the space, the sound comforting in its familiarity. Izuku shifts his focus to the pot, stirring the base of the curry. The scent of skis begins to fill the kitchen, warm and rich, mingling with the soft steam rising from the rice pot. There's something about cooking that makes everything feel more manageable. It's like No matter how out of control things are, I can control this. The steps are simple. It's predictable. Shouta hands over the chopped vegetables without a word, quietly acknowledging the layers beneath Izuku's words. Thanks, says the young doctor. The only sounds in the kitchen are the bubbling curry and the soft clatter of utensils as they settle into a comfortable silence. Izuku stirs the pot, watching the mixture thicken. As the rich aroma of simmering curry filled the kitchen, Izuku leaned against the counter, the warmth of the stove a comforting presence. He could sense Shouta's attentive gaze, a silent encouragement to share more of himself. Shouta broke the silence, his voice steady. So, why did you want to study medicine, then? Izuku took a deep breath, taking in the rich smell of homemade food. I decided it in middle school, he began, his eyes drifting to the floor as the past unfolded in his mind. I was in my third, maybe second, year of middle school, and it was hard. The kids in my class made fun of me because I said that I wanted to be a hero. They'd tell me my quirk was useless for heroics. He paused, feeling the echoes of laughter and scorn that had haunted him. Shouta's expression shifted, an almost imperceptible tightness in his jaw, but he remained silent, giving Izuku the space to continue. One evening, I found myself on the school's rooftop, just lost in thought. Nothing bad, I promise, Izuku recalled, the memory vivid and raw. It was late, and I felt lonely. That's when All Might showed up. A flicker of interest ignited in Shouta's eyes, and he leaned in slightly, as if the very air between them held a gravity of its own. All Might? Asked the hero. He was just passing by, Izuku continued, a smile creeping onto his face at the thought. I was so excited to see him. I knew I had to ask him something, anything. I thought maybe he'd give me some advice. The memory danced in his mind like a flickering flame, and he couldn't help but recount the moment in detail. I remember asking if I could ask him a question, and I'll never forget the smile he gave me. Shouta's focus deepened, drawn into the past as Izuku continued. I told him about the teasing and how they made me feel useless. I told him that my classmates said that my quirk was useless for heroics. I was just a kid who wanted to help people, and hearing that hurt more than I could express. Shouta nodded, understanding the depth of that pain, and Izuku pressed on. He asked me what my quirk was. I told him that it works like anesthesia, that was all I knew about it at that age. And then, he said something I'll never forget. Izuku's voice turned serious, reverent. He said, I think it's an amazing quirk, but it wouldn't reach its full potential in heroics. Have you considered being a doctor? You could save countless lives. You can be another kind of hero. The words hung in the air between them, imbued with the weight of hope and inspiration. Izuku's eyes shimmered with unshed emotion as he recalled the moment that had altered the trajectory of his life. And it was like a new world opened in front of my eyes. All Might inspired me. So I started researching how to use my quirk more efficiently and how it could help in healthcare. And well, the rest is history. Izuku's eyes were lost somewhere around Shouta's dark eyes, deep emeralds dancing in the fog of a memory. Shouta felt a pang in his chest, recognizing the flicker of hope in Izuku's voice. He shifted slightly, reflecting on his own journey, a mirror to Izuku's struggles. I get that, Shouta replied, his tone low and contemplative. I became a hero, even when people called me a villain because of my quirk. All I wanted was to save people, too. Izuku met Shouta's gaze, their shared experiences weaving a fragile but resilient bond. You've done so much for others, Shouta, Izuku said earnestly. Shouta looked down, a shadow of doubt crossing his features. But sometimes, it feels like I failed to save the people I wanted to. Sometimes, we can only do so much to help others. Even if we give it our all, there are things that are just out of our reach. That's what my attending physician said to me after Haruma's surgery, Izuku said, stepping closer, his voice firm and unwavering. Shouta felt a wave of warmth spread over his body, the weight on his shoulders lifting just a little. As the aroma of the simmering curry filled the kitchen, a warmth settled over them, blending with the steam rising from the pot. Izuku stirred the mixture, feeling the heaviness in his heart lift just a fraction with each gentle motion. You know, Eri really likes you, Shouta said, leaning back against the counter, his eyes reflecting a softness that made Izuku's heart skip. She talks about you all the time. Izuku chuckled, a warm flush creeping to his cheeks. Then he turned off the stove and went to look for plates to serve the food. I adore her, really. You should come over for dinner then, Shouta suggested, a teasing lilt to his voice. The corner of his mouth twitched upward, revealing a glimmer of mischief. Eri would love it. Izuku raised an eyebrow, a smile teasing at his lips. Is that so? Said the young doctor, pouring a good amount of curry over a plate of rice. Shouta leaned forward, his expression shifting to something more sincere, his cheeks rosy, and his eyes bright. Perhaps it's also because I want you to. The weight of his words hung between them, thick and tangible. Izuku felt his pulse quicken, the the quiet intimacy of the moment enveloping them. Like a warm blanket. Shouta's gaze held a gravity that drew Izuku in, warmth spread through his chest and maybe he felt his cheeks burn up when he saw Shouta's gaze fall down for a second. Izuku smiled and handed a plate over to Shouta. It's a date then. He wipes his hands on his jeans, drying them from any sweat he might have accumulated while making his way here. And, I mean, it's just one flight of stairs, but he's about to have a date. So, now, he's here, in front of Shouta's door, wiping his hands because he's sweating like a teenager. Izuku inhales deeply, trying to calm his heart, but it's useless. It feels like it's pounding in his throat, the adrenaline thrumming beneath his skin. His hand lingers near the door as he knocks, the soft sound reverberating through the quiet hallway. He can't help but smooth down the front of his shirt, the delicate flower design brushing flattening under his fingertips. The door opens with a soft click, revealing Shouta. And oh, Izuku's breath catches in his throat. Shouta is standing there in a tight-fitting gray shirt that hugs his toned frame and black sweatpants that fall low on his hips. Izuku's eyes instinctively trail over him, taking in the way the fabric stretches across his chest and arms. It's such a casual look, but on Shouta, it feels impossibly NTMT. And suddenly, Izuku feels way too overdressed. He's just wearing some jeans and a white shirt with a flower design. It's a cute shirt, though it's quite short, and he can't really lift his arms unless he wants to flash Shouta, but overall, it's a cute shirt. For a moment, neither of them says anything. Their eyes lock, a few silent seconds stretching out like an eternity. Shouta seems frozen, his gaze roaming over Izuku from head to toe, lingering on the curve of his lips and the way his shirt dips below his waistline. Izuku's heart skips a beat under the weight of Shouta's attention, his pulse roaring in his ears. Finally, Shouta clears his throat and looks away, a faint flush creeping up his neck. Sorry, he murmurs, rubbing the back of his neck in that familiar way, giving Izuku a hint that he's flustered. I lost track of time. I didn't get a chance to change. Izuku bites his lip, trying to hold back a smile. His voice is soft, teasing, as he lets out a quiet giggle. It's fine, really, he says, eyes twinkling with amusement. The sight of Shouta, so composed and serious most of the time, being this awkward and apologetic, it's endearing in a way Izuku wasn't quite prepared for. Shouta steps aside, motioning for Izuku to come in. You're just in time, he says, trying to shift the conversation. Dinner's almost ready. Izuku walks in, the scent of something savory and warm filling his senses. As the door closes behind him, a small blur of excitement rushes toward him, and before he knows it, Eri is hugging his waist, her face beaming up at him. Izuku, she says, her voice full of happiness. You're here. He beams back, bending down to scoop her into a hug. Hey, Eri. I missed you, he says, giving her a gentle squeeze before setting her back down. She grabs his hand, tugging him toward the living room, but not before casting an excited glance toward Shouta, who's standing nearby, arms crossed, his expression soft, and a hint of a smile creeping into his lips. I was showing Dad all the drawings I made for you, wanna see? Eri's voice is full of pride as she pulls Izuku toward a stack of papers on the table. Izuku lets her guide him, his heart already feeling lighter at how joyful she seems. He glances back at Shouta, who watches them with a quiet smile. You go ahead, Shouta says, nodding toward the kitchen. I'll finish up in here. Izuku raises a brow. Are you sure? I could help. Shouta waves him off. Stay with Eri, he insists, his voice a touch softer now. I've got it covered. With a small smile, Izuku nods and lets Eri lead him into the living room. Eri, with the enthusiasm only a child could muster, spreads out her drawings on the coffee table. Look! I made these for you, she chirps, her eyes shining as she pushes a brightly colored piece of paper toward Izuku. It's a simple drawing of a sunlit sky and a stick figure standing in a field of flowers. Izuku's heart softens at the sight. He picks up the paper carefully, as if it's the most valuable thing in the world. This is beautiful, Eri. His praise is genuine, the words coming straight from his heart. And Izuku feels his heart melting because this is so darn cute. She beams, her cheeks flushing with happiness. I made more, she announces, pulling out a second drawing, this one of 3 figures. It's her, Shouta, and Izuku, all hand in hand, standing under a giant rainbow. He can't help the lump that forms in his throat as he stares at the image. The simplicity of it, the innocence. There's something so heart-achingly sweet about being included in her world like this. Eri, this is amazing. He smiles at her, his chest swelling with emotion. Thank you so much. Before he can say anything more, Shouta's voice calls out from the kitchen. Dinner's ready. Eri jumps up, taking Izuku's hand as if they hadn't just sat down, pulling him toward the small dining table. Shouta emerges from the kitchen with plates in hand, simple bowls of rice topped with mapo tofu, along with a small tray of onigiri. Just as they sit down, Eri tugs on Izuku's sleeve, her eyes wide with excitement. "I helped make the onigiris," she declares, a proud smile lighting up her face. "I put the seaweed on all by myself." Izuku's eyes widen, his heart melting at her enthusiasm. "You did? That's amazing, Eri. I can't wait to try them," he replies, his voice full of warmth. Eri nods, beaming with pride, clearly pleased with herself. Shouta arrives with the last plates and sits down, his gaze never leaving his plate, clearly feeling self-conscious, as he rubs the back of his neck after placing the last dish on the table. "It's not much, but I hope it's alright." Izuku's smile is warm and reassuring. "It looks great," he says earnestly, sitting down as Shouta pulls out a chair across from him. He grabs chopsticks and takes a bite. "You two really did a good job." Warmth bubbles inside his chest. The mapo tofu is a bit salty, and the rice could have been cooked a little longer, but even with those flaws, Izuku beams when he tastes the food. Shouta's eyes flicker with a hint of surprise, and Izuku catches the faintest blush on his cheeks. "Next time, I'll cook for you too," Izuku offers softly, his tone light but the meaning heavy with promise. Shouta's gaze snaps up to meet Izuku's, and for a moment, time seems to slow. "Next time," he echoes, his voice quieter, almost unsure. Izuku nods, his heart fluttering. "Yeah, next time." Shouta blinks, the weight of the words settling in. His pulse quickens, and before he knows it, there's a warmth creeping up his neck. He clears his throat, looking away for a moment. This wasn't supposed to happen, he's an adult, he shouldn't feel giddy like a teenager. Izuku, sensing the shift in the air, gives him a reassuring smile. He glances over at Eri, who is happily munching on her rice, completely unaware of the feelings flooding the room. They fall into a comfortable conversation, mostly because Eri talks about everything to Izuku, but it helps ease the tension. After dinner, the soft clinking of dishes fades into the background as Eri's energetic chatter begins to slow, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. She's been up and down from her chair all evening, eager to share more of her drawings and talk about her day with Izuku, but now the fatigue is catching up with her. A wide yawn escapes her, and she rubs her eyes with the back of her hand. Shouta stands, his gaze soft as he watches her. "All right, little one," he says, his voice low and gentle. "Time for bed." Eri pouts, clutching Izuku's hand tighter. "But I want Izuku to stay," she mumbles, her words slurred with sleepiness. Shouta chuckles, rubbing the back of his neck as he watches the scene unfold. He steps toward her, ready to scoop her up and carry her to bed, but Izuku beats him to it. He lifts Eri like she weighs nothing, and she finds comfort on his shoulder, eyes blinking slowly. "I'll tuck her in," Izuku offers, his voice tender, eyes filled with warmth as he looks at Shouta. There's something about the way he says it, a quiet, gentle confidence that makes Shouta pause. He opens his mouth to protest, but the look in Izuku's eyes so caring, so full of affection melts whatever resolve Shouta had. He nods, stepping back. "All right," Shouta says, his voice barely above a whisper, but there's a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes as he watches Izuku take Eri's hand. Eri beams sleepily, the last bit of energy in her lighting up her face as she is carried to her room. Once there in her room, the soft glow of a nightlight fills the space, casting a warm, comforting light over the small bed and the stuffed animals piled on one side. Izuku gently lays Eri on the bed, pulling the covers over her tiny frame. She snuggles into her pillow, her eyelids drooping heavily now. "Will you read me a story?" she asks, her voice barely more than a whisper. Izuku smiles, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "Of course," he says softly, reaching for the storybook on her nightstand. He flips through the pages, picking one of the shorter stories, and starts reading in a gentle, soothing voice. Eri's eyes flutter closed before he even finishes the first page, her small hand still resting on his. Izuku carefully sets the book aside, his eyes lingering on her peaceful face. She's so small, so innocent, and the love he feels for her is overwhelming. He brushes a stray lock of hair from her forehead and quietly stands, making sure to shut the door softly behind him. As Izuku steps back into the living room, he sees Shouta sitting on the sofa, his posture relaxed, but his eyes trained on the floor, deep in thought. The TV is on, but the volume is low, and it's clear Shouta's not really paying attention to whatever is playing. Izuku's presence seems to pull Shouta from his thoughts, and when their eyes meet, there's something different in Shouta's gaze, something softer. For a long moment, neither of them says anything. The quiet between them is comfortable, almost charged with something unspoken. Shouta breaks the silence first, his voice low and hesitant. "Do you have to go?" The question is barely a whisper, as if he's not sure he should even be asking it. Izuku's heart skips a beat, the simple question hitting him harder than it should. There's something vulnerable in Shouta's tone, something that makes Izuku's chest tighten. He moves closer, his footsteps soft against the wooden floor, until he's standing right in front of Shouta. "No," Izuku says, a small smile tugging at his lips as he sits down beside him, closer than before. "I asked for the day off. I wanted to be here tonight." Shouta's eyes widen for a moment, as if he's surprised by Izuku's words, but then a flicker of relief passes through his gaze. He nods, his lips pressing together in a faint smile. "I see." They sit in silence for a few more seconds, the air between them filled with unspoken words, the soft flicker of the TV casting a gentle light over the room. Izuku's heart is pounding, not from nervousness like earlier, but from something warmer. Without thinking, he shifts closer to Shouta, their knees brushing together. It's a small touch, but the warmth that spreads from that simple contact sends a wave of heat through Izuku's body. Shouta doesn't pull away. Instead, he glances at Izuku, his dark eyes searching his face as if he's trying to figure something out. "Thanks," Shouta murmurs, his voice so quiet it's almost drowned out by the TV. "For being so nice to Eri. You've done so much for her, and she adores you, and you didn't even have to." Izuku shakes his head, his heart aching at the thought that Shouta feels like he owes him something. "I wanted to," he says, his voice gentle but firm. Shouta's gaze flickers, something fragile passing through his eyes. He looks away for a moment, his hand unconsciously rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous habit Izuku's come to recognize. There's tension in the air, but it's not uncomfortable. It's the kind of tension that comes with unspoken feelings. Izuku doesn't push. He just waits, giving Shouta the space he needs. And after a few more heartbeats, Shouta finally speaks, his voice low and sincere. "I'm glad you're here." The words are simple, but the weight behind them is heavy. Izuku feels something in his chest tighten, his pulse quickening. He smiles, a soft, genuine smile, and when Shouta looks at him again, their eyes lock in a way that feels different. There's no awkwardness, no hesitation. They settle to watch a crappy movie. At some point during the movie, Shouta's mind starts to wander. He tries to keep his attention on the screen, but his focus keeps drifting, always circling back to Izuku. He can't help it. The room feels too quiet, the air too thick, and Izuku, sitting so close yet just out of reach, seems to put him on edge. He caves. He parts his eyes from the TV and watches Izuku in the soft glow, the way the light catches in his emerald green eyes, making them shine like gems in the dark. Izuku is slumped slightly into the cushions, his expression relaxed and content, curls falling softly around his face. In this light, his freckles look more prominent, scattered like constellations across his cheeks, each one drawing Shouta's gaze deeper into the quiet wonder of him. Shouta doesn't know when his breath starts coming in shorter, more shallow gasps, his blood thrumming in his veins. There's something about the stillness of the moment, something about Izuku's presence that makes his heart ache. It's as if every part of him is pulled toward Izuku, like an invisible force he can't control, doesn't want to control. There's a beauty in him that leaves Shouta feeling vulnerable in a way he hasn't felt in years. It's raw and unfiltered, the sight of Izuku just being here, existing, making something wild bloom in Shouta's chest. His fingers twitch where they rest on the sofa, wanting to reach out, wanting to feel the warmth of Izuku beneath his touch. And suddenly, it's all too much. He wants to move closer, but part of him hesitates. His mind is in chaos, yet the pull toward Izuku is undeniable, relentless. Izuku is still focused on the movie, but something shifts in the room. The air grows heavier, electric. As if I had felt his gaze before, Izuku turns his head. Slowly, as if drawn by a magnetic force, he glances toward Shouta. Their eyes meet, and the world narrows. Emerald green, so full of life, so open and kind. Izuku's gaze feels so warm, seeing right through to the heart of him. It's unnerving in the most beautiful way, like Izuku knows everything about the storm brewing inside Shouta without a single word exchanged. Shouta doesn't know when it happens, when his body starts moving on its own, when his mind finally stops fighting what his heart has wanted for so long. He leans in, closing the distance between them, the world outside falling away until it's just the two of them, suspended in this delicate moment. And then, as if it's the most natural thing in the world, Shouta kisses him. It's tentative at first, his lips brushing softly against Izuku's. But the heat is there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. His hand finds Izuku's face, thumb grazing his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin, the soft hum of life beneath his touch. Izuku melts into him, a soft, surprised gasp escaping his lips before he responds, his hands resting on Shouta's shoulders, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. The kiss deepens, slow and steady at first, but then more urgent, more desperate, as if both of them have been holding this back for too long. Shouta's heart races as he pulls Izuku closer, the world outside the moment completely forgotten. It's just the taste of Izuku on his lips, the warmth of his hands, the steady beat of their hearts pounding in unison. The kiss is everything Shouta didn't know he needed, all the quiet longing he'd buried coming to the surface. When they finally pull apart, breathless, their foreheads rest together, both of them caught in the gravity of what just happened. Neither speaks for a moment, the room filled only with the sound of their shallow breathing. Shouta's hand still cradles Izuku's face, his thumb brushing softly against his skin. Izuku's eyes flutter open, looking at him with such tenderness, such softness that it nearly undoes Shouta all over again. I didn't mean to, Shouta starts, but Izuku's hand comes up to cover his, holding him in place. It's okay, Izuku whispers, his voice barely above a breath, his lips curling into a soft, genuine smile. I liked it. Shouta's heart stumbles in his chest at the words. His grip on Izuku tightens just a little, and for the first time in what feels like forever, he allows himself to believe that this moment is real. Izuku's breath is still unsteady from the kiss, heart pounding in his chest. Shouta's forehead rests gently against his, and for a moment, everything feels suspended, like the world outside has fallen away, leaving just the two of them, breathing in sync. Izuku's eyes flutter open, and he looks at Shouta. Dark, onyx eyes meet his, heavy with the weight of too many sleepless nights. The lines beneath his eyes speak of endless vigilance, of battles fought, and of burdens carried without complaint. His stubble is rough, his long hair falling haphazardly across his face, framing him in a way that's disheveled yet so right. Something tugs at Izuku's chest. He can't quite put it into words, but as he studies Shouta's face, those tired eyes, the sharpness of his features softened in. The low light, something clicks into place. It's like everything suddenly makes sense. All the times he'd felt a warmth stir in his chest when Shouta was near, the way his heart would skip just slightly whenever Shouta gave him one of those rare, quiet smiles. The way he was always drawn to him, seeking him out without ever realizing he was doing it. Oh. It's so simple, really so obvious now that he's staring into Shouta's eyes, those deep, dark eyes that have seen so much yet still hold something gentle at this moment. Izuku feels his breath catch, his heart stuttering as the realization settles over him like a soft, inevitable truth. His fingers brush against Shouta's cheek almost without thinking. Tracing the roughness of his stubble, Shouta leans into the touch, eyes fluttering closed. And at that moment, so quiet, so still, Izuku knows. He doesn't say anything. There's no need to. The realization hums quietly in his chest, warm and undeniable, but he lets it settle there, just for now. There will be time to figure it out later. For now, it's enough to be here, to exist in this shared breath, with Shouta's quiet presence filling the space between them. And as Shouta's eyes open again, dark and steady, Izuku can't help but smile, a small, soft thing that barely reaches his lips. Because now he knows. Now he understands. It had been a few days since that evening, since that soft, shared kiss under the dim light of the TV. He carries himself more comfortably now, maybe it's the glee of these feelings that he just discovered. Izuku makes his way to the school building early in the morning. He was wearing a black long-sleeved shirt and dark blue scrubs, all under his white coat. The morning was crisp and bright as Izuku made his way to the teacher's lounge. The halls were still quiet this early, with most of the students at breakfast back in the dorms. The light from the rising sun streamed in through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Izuku had been feeling exhausted after his shifts in the hospital, coming directly to the school for his class, but today he was especially eager and energized. Shouta had invited him to oversee the joint training exercise between Class A and Class B, a rare opportunity for him to watch the students in action and get a closer look at their progress. Izuku smiled to himself at the memory of Shouta's voice, low and so warm when he'd asked. Izuku reached the lounge just as Shouta was finishing his cup of coffee. Morning, Izuku greeted him, trying to keep his voice steady, though his heart fluttered at the sight of the man. Shouta gave a small smile, his expression softening and small wrinkles appearing in the corner of his eyes. Morning. Ready for the show? Definitely, Izuku replied, unable to hide the excitement in his tone. It'll be nice to see the kids in action. They walked together down the long hall towards Ground Gamma, making their way to the observation platform where they would be observing the exercise. The buzz of energy grew as they approached. The students from both classes were already gathering. Some were chatting excitedly, others stretching or mentally preparing themselves. The atmosphere was electric, a charged anticipation hanging in the air. As they arrived at the platform, Shouta moved to stand near Vlad King, Class B's homeroom teacher, while Izuku took his place beside them. From this vantage point, they could see the wide and intricate training field below. Vlad King stepped forward, his booming voice cutting through the murmurs of the students. All right, listen up. Today's exercise is a test of teamwork and strategy. You'll be divided into teams for a game of cops and robbers. Class A versus Class B. The rules are simple: capture or evade. The team that captures the most opponents and puts them into jail wins. Izuku leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd of students as the team pairings were drawn. He couldn't help but smile at the mixture of excitement and determination on their faces. The teams were announced, and Izuku watched closely as the groups formed up. His mind immediately began analyzing their dynamics. Katsuki's team, for instance, was a powerhouse, with Katsuki's impeccable technique balanced by Shiro's quick reflexes, Jiru's sharp thinking, and Sato's raw strength. Izuku couldn't help but feel a small twinge of pride at how well-rounded that group was. The game was set. Excitement rippled through the air, and the students of Class A and Class B stood on either side of the field, eyeing each other with competitive intensity. Even though this was training, none of them took it lightly. Izuku stood at the edge of the platform, arms held to the railing and his eyes flicking from team to team as they strategized. Each group had its strengths, but in a game like this where creativity and quick thinking could outweigh brute force, anything was possible. Vlad King's voice echoed over the field. The first battle starts now. A loud buzzer rang, signaling the beginning of the exercise, and chaos immediately unfolded. Both teams dispersed in opposite directions. Izuku's attention was first drawn to Team Azui. Tsuyu had taken the lead, as expected. Her calm, methodical approach allowed her to issue orders with precision, guiding Denki, Kirishima, and Koda into strategic positions. She made a quick decision to split their team, Kirishima and Denki moving offensively while Tsuyu and Koda remained behind to guard their base. Smart move, Izuku murmured, noticing how Denki's ranged attacks paired well with Kirishima's up-close brawling style. He knew the two could complement each other perfectly, and Tsuyu's instincts were sharp as always. Just a few meters away, Shouta appeared, his quirk activated, and the battle began. Then, Izuku's focus was pulled toward Team Shinso. Hitoshi, positioned with Uraraka and Mina, was playing a more defensive game. He hung back, eyes narrowed, as he analyzed the movements of the opposing teams. It was clear he was biding his time, waiting for the right moment to use his brainwashing quirk. Izuku admired how strategic Hitoshi had become, learning to capitalize on even the smallest openings. He felt warmth in his chest at how similar he was to Shouta. As Izuku watched, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. These kids were impressive. They were giving it their all, full of that raw determination to prove themselves. But underneath the pride he felt for them, a sense of unease crept into his chest. His gaze kept going to Team Monoma. They were also involved in a more subtle game, just as their opponents, Team Shinso. Something felt off. An ugly feeling crept inside his gut, settling uncomfortable between his intestines. His hearing felt more acute and his eyes kept fixed in the battle. The horrible unease kept him silent. Yanagi's poltergeist quirk was powerful, but combined with Kodai's quirk, which let her shrink and grow objects, it had the potential to create dangerous situations if things weren't carefully controlled. Izuku's instincts kicked in as he watched them from afar. Kodai took a bunch of shrunk screws and bolts from her pocket, throwing them to the air and unshrinking them in an instant while Reiko sent them spinning toward Team Shinso. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. The movements were too quick, faster than he anticipated. He saw the metal bolts careen toward Mina and Ochako, enclosing them in a makeshift cage. For a second, he prayed that Hitoshi or one of the others would deflect them. But then, the worst happened. With a horrible, wet sound, one of the bolts struck Mina's leg. Her scream tore through the air, piercing the battlefield and stopping everyone's movements in an instant. Time seemed to stop. Mina collapsed to the ground, clutching her leg, blood already seeping through her turquoise costume. Her face contorted in pain and her white mask already had wet patches as she cried. For a moment, the entire field was silent, students and teachers alike frozen in shock. It was as though no one could quite process what had just happened. Izuku didn't hesitate. His body moved on pure instinct, his heart pounding in his chest as he leapt down from the platform. His medical kit, thank God he made the decision to bring it just in case, held tight as he sprinted across the field, his mind racing. He didn't think about the students watching, or even Shouta. His focus was solely on Mina, who was writhing in pain on the ground. "Mina," he called out, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands were already moving, untying the belt of his white coat, ready to use it as a makeshift tourniquet. Mina's eyes were squeezed shut, her breathing ragged, her face a paler shade of pink. "It's okay, Mina. I'm here," Izuku whispered, though his own voice shook with the effort to stay calm. He tied the belt tightly around her thigh, a few inches above the bolt lodged in her leg. "I'm going to take care of you, okay? I need you to stay calm. Can you do that for me?" Mina nodded weakly, though her face was twisted in agony. "Can I use my quirk on you? It'll make the pain go away," asked Izuku, analyzing the injury and planning how to treat it. Mina gave him another nod. He placed his palm on the girl's forehead, activating his quirk. His palm glowed as the anesthesia crept its way through the girl's body. Mina visibly relaxed. Now, with gloves on, Izuku's fingers worked quickly, pulling out a pair of scissors from his kit. He cut away the fabric of her costume around the wound, giving him a clearer view of the injury. Blood soaked the turquoise fabric, but he didn't let it slow him down. As he worked, his mind was a flurry of thoughts. The bolt, it wasn't too deep, but it was dangerously close to the muscle. He needed to stop the bleeding before things got worse. In the distance, he could hear Shouta's voice calling for Recovery Girl, but it was all background noise to Izuku now. His focus was entirely on Mina. Izuku remained kneeling by Mina's side as Recovery Girl arrived, her face set in a serious but calm expression. Recovery Girl gently patted Izuku on the shoulder, signaling that she would take over. "You did well, dearie," she said softly, her voice steady despite the situation. "I've got it from here." Izuku exhaled, relief washing over him as he stood up and stepped aside. The adrenaline that had kept him moving now left his limbs feeling heavy. He turned, his eyes scanning the platform where the students stood, their excited faces now tinged with worry. "Listen up, everyone." Vlad King's voice boomed, cutting through the murmurs of the students. "The training exercise is suspended. I want everyone to report back to the changing rooms and go to the classroom." The students hesitated for a moment, some still casting worried glances at Mina, but eventually they began to move. Izuku stayed back, watching as the students slowly filed out, their shoulders slumped in a mix of disappointment and concern. He turned back toward the field, noticing Mina being carried back to the infirmary, followed by Recovery Girl, save for Shouta, who stood on the platform with his arms crossed. His gaze was fixed on Izuku, something unreadable flickering in his tired eyes. The moment their eyes met, Izuku felt a tug in his chest. Without needing any words, Shouta motioned for him to join him on the platform. Izuku hesitated for only a moment before making his way over, his heart thudding a little harder in his chest. As Izuku approached, Shouta let out a small sigh, his posture softening slightly. "You did good," he said, his voice low but sincere. "Thanks." Izuku blinked, surprised by the praise. I just did what needed to be done," he said quietly, rubbing the back of his neck. Shouta gave a slight smile, his gaze shifting back to the field where the remnants of the exercise remained. "Still," he murmured, "it's not easy to stay calm under pressure like that. I understand that it's your job and that you do this every day, but still, you did good." There was a beat of silence between them, the weight of Shouta's words hanging in the air. Izuku's thoughts swirled, the exhaustion catching up to him. The whole day had been a blur of emotions, excitement, fear, and now a strange, quiet relief. "You're always like this, you know?" Shouta's voice broke the silence, drawing Izuku's attention. "You take everything on your shoulders without hesitation. You feel too much, I know this affects you more than you let on." Izuku blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift in tone. Hearing those words from him made Izuku's chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. He opened his mouth to respond, but Shouta continued before he could find the right words. "You need to be careful, though," Shouta added, his voice softer now, almost as if he were letting his guard down for just a moment. "You push yourself too hard, Izuku." Izuku felt a lump form in his throat, the feeling of being seen, truly seen, by Shouta stirring something deep within him. He knew Shouta wasn't just talking about today. It was a warning, a reminder of all the times Izuku had pushed himself past his limits, driven by the same determination that had both propelled him forward and nearly destroyed him. "I know," Izuku finally replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Shouta looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing Izuku's words. Then, with a quiet sigh, he uncrossed his arms and stepped a little closer. "I'm holding you to that," he said, his tone firm but carrying a trace of something gentler underneath. Izuku's breath caught in his throat, the warmth of Shouta's proximity sending a small shiver down his spine. He nodded, feeling the weight of the day's events settle more heavily on his shoulders. "Thank you," he murmured, his eyes meeting Shouta's. Shouta's gaze softened just slightly, the usual sternness in his eyes giving way to something warmer. "Always," he said simply. Izuku swallowed hard, feelings settling in his chest like a warm glow. He nodded, unable to find the words to respond. For a moment, they just stood there in comfortable silence, the cool morning air beginning to settle in around them. The field was empty now, the students and teachers having retreated back to the school. The adrenaline from earlier had long since faded, leaving only the quiet aftermath of the day. As they stood there, side by side, Izuku felt the tension in his body finally begin to unwind. The weight of the day, the worry for his students, and the responsibility he always carried, it all seemed to fade away in Shouta's presence. Izuku filled his lungs with fresh air. "Come on," Shouta said after a moment, his voice soft. Let's head back. Izuku and Shouta stepped into the infirmary, the antiseptic smell filling the air. It was a familiar environment, yet the gravity of the situation made it feel heavier than usual. They approached Recovery Girl, who was sitting on her chair, Mina's medical record opened in her computer. "Chio," Izuku said, his voice steady but laced with concern. "How is Mina doing?" "She is going to be fine, thanks to Izuku. There are no signs of infection and my quirk healed the incision nicely. She is going to need some sleep, so I'll keep her here until she wakes up, then I'll dispatch her to her class," said Recovery Girl from her seat. Mina's digital medical records opened in her computer. "That's good, thanks Chio," thanked Izuku. He felt a weight being released from his shoulders. He felt lighter, the knot in his stomach easing, but as he glanced down at Mina's still form, sadness crept back in. As they turned to leave, Izuku caught sight of Shouta's concerned gaze, the man's brow furrowing slightly as they stepped into the hallway. They walked in silence for a moment, the weight of the day's events hanging between them like a thick fog. Once they reached a more secluded part of the corridor, Shouta paused, placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "Izuku," he began gently, "are you okay?" Izuku hesitated, feeling the emotions welling up inside him, twisting and turning in his gut. I don't know, Shouta, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before the last match, I had this terrible feeling. Like something was going to go wrong, but I didn't say anything. I thought it was just nerves, but I should have acted on it. I could have said something." His voice broke, allowing a torrent of intense emotions to burst forth. The wall he had constructed around his emotions vanished in an instant once more. Tears brimmed in his eyes as he struggled to keep them at bay. "What if something worse happened because I didn't listen to that feeling? Izuku," Shouta said, his tone firm yet soothing, "you can't carry this weight alone. You did what you could at the moment. It's not your fault." But the guilt gnawed at him, pulling him deeper into despair. "I can't shake this feeling," Izuku cried, the tears spilling over, each drop a release of pent-up frustration and fear. He felt so small, so powerless in the face of what had happened. Fat tears drenching his clothes, nose red, and violent hiccups. Then, suddenly, he felt strong arms envelop him, pulling him into a tight embrace. Hard muscle pressed against his cheek, and the rhythmic beat of Shouta's heart echoed beside his ear. The warmth of the hug wrapped around him like a lifeline, grounding him in the chaos of his emotions. "I've got you," Shouta murmured, his voice steady and reassuring. "You're not alone in this. I'm right here." The comfort of Shouta's presence enveloped him, calming the storm raging inside. Izuku leaned into the embrace, the warmth and strength anchoring him as he let out a shuddering breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice muffled against Shouta's shoulder. "I always end up crying in front of you." "Don't be," Shouta replied softly, tightening his hold. "You feel deeply for everyone, and that's what makes you who you are. But it's okay to feel overwhelmed sometimes. We all do." As Izuku breathed in the familiar scent of Shouta, a mixture of wood, laundry detergent, and the faintest hint of something herbal, he felt the weight of his guilt begin to lift. The tears flowed freely now, but they felt cathartic, each one carrying away a piece of his burden. After what felt like an eternity, the tears subsided, and he pulled back slightly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Shouta stepped back too, his gaze steady and warm. "Feel better?" "A little," Izuku admitted, managing a weak smile. "Thanks for being here, Sho." "Anytime," Shouta said, a small smile breaking through his usually stoic demeanor at the sound of that nickname. He reached his hand and cupped Izuku's cheek. The young doctor leaned into the touch, a small smile drawn onto his face. He traced circles with his thumb over Izuku's freckled skin, his other arm still wrapped tightly around the other's waist. "Now, let's get back to the teacher's lounge, shall we?" said Shouta, loosening his grip on Izuku's waist, still caressing his cheek. Izuku nodded, feeling lighter as they separated and began walking again. The bell rings loudly in the hallways, signaling the class is done. Izuku bids goodbye to the students and grabs his things, exiting the classroom. Outside, the sun shone brightly through the large windows lining the corridors. The warmth felt good against Izuku's skin, but his mind was focused on something else entirely. Yesterday's events replayed in his head, Mina collapsing and the blood staining her hero costume. Izuku's feet led him to the 3A classroom, where he pushed the door open with a soft creak. Inside, students were milling about, chatting in clusters, or preparing for their next lesson. The room was filled with light conversation and the sound of shuffling papers. It took him a moment to locate Mina amidst the hustle, but as soon as her eyes landed on him, her entire face lit up. "Midoriya-sensei," she exclaimed, rushing toward him, her pink hair bouncing with each step. Before he could react, she wrapped her arms around him in a quick, grateful hug. "Thanks for saving me yesterday." Izuku laughed, the sound bubbling up easily. It's nothing, he said, ruffling her hair playfully as they pulled apart. I wasn't going to leave you there to suffer. Mina pulled back and beamed at him, her eyes full of appreciation. Still, you really saved me, you know. Quick thinking and all. You were a hero back there. Izuku waved a hand, dismissing the praise with a sheepish grin. I'm just glad you're okay. Across the room, Shouta stood next to the teacher's podium, his bright yellow sleeping bag calling for him but being ignored, half listening to the casual hum of the classroom. His eyes were fixed on a set of papers in front of him, but the moment Izuku's laughter rang through the air, he looked up, just for a second. The sound of Izuku's laugh caught him off guard, resonating in the space between them. It was warm, loud, and unreserved, so adorable and fresh. His eyes flicked toward the door where Izuku and Mina stood, and before he could stop himself, he felt a small flush of heat rise in his cheeks. Mina, oblivious to Shouta's sudden internal shift, grinned and asked, So, what's next for you, sensei? I'm heading home to catch some sleep, Izuku replied with a chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. I had a shift at the hospital before I came to UA today, and I'm wiped out. From across the room, Katsuki overheard the conversation and snorted. DMN nerd, he said loudly, leaning back in his chair. You still do overnight shifts? You'll be wrinkly as hell by the time you hit 35. Izuku couldn't help but laugh at Katsuki's teasing, the sound soft and fond. I cut down my shifts, actually, he replied. Now I only do Monday to Thursday, so I'm resting a lot more. In the background, Shouta kept glancing at Izuku. He could see the exhaustion in the younger man's eyes, even beneath the bright energy he radiated, subtle eye bags hung under his bright emeralds. Izuku was always giving, always pushing himself past his limits. Hey, Aizawa-sensei? Denki suddenly appeared beside Shouta, breaking him out of his thoughts. He leaned in with a knowing smile, wiggling his eyebrows. Midoriya-sensei, huh? Shouta tensed for a moment, recognizing the question immediately. I believe that's none of your business, Kaminari, he said, his voice low but firm. Denki held up his hands in mock surrender, a grin still playing on his lips. I know. But still, you two make sense, you know, he added with a wink before sauntering off, leaving Shouta to stew in the wake of the comment. The bell rang, signaling the end of the break. Izuku turned toward the classroom, giving the students a bright smile. All right, I'll see you all later. Be good, he said, waving at them as he made his way toward the door. Just before stepping out, Izuku caught Shouta's eye from across the room and grinned. His smile was wide, almost playful, and before he turned to leave, he winked. Shouta's heart gave an involuntary lurch. The students around him exchanged knowing glances but said nothing. Shouta, however, felt the weight of Izuku's playful energy warming his chest. After a busy morning at UA, Shouta found himself checking his phone during a short break between his lessons. He wasn't expecting much, but a text from certain someone caught his eye. Izuku. Hey Shou, are you busy by 2 p.m.? 11:43. Shou, love. No, why? 11:43. Izuku. Have lunch with me? 11:45. Shou, love. Yes. 11:45. Izuku. Come over to my place and I'll cook SMTH, love. 11:46. Shouta smiled at his phone, his heart warming a little at the casual invitation. He wasn't sure why Izuku's messages always had this effect on him lately, but he didn't linger on the thought too much. Instead, he typed a quick response and slipped his phone back into his pocket, already looking forward to the lunch. By the time 2 p.m. rolled around, Shouta found himself standing in front of Izuku's apartment door. He knocked, hands in his pockets, trying to ignore the slight nerves that twisted in his gut. The door swung open, revealing Izuku dressed in baby pink sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt that looked impossibly soft. Shouta blinked, momentarily taken aback by how comfortable and at ease Izuku looked. His curls were ruffled and messy, and he had a slight blush on his freckled cheeks, so beautiful and raw. Hey, Shou! Izuku greeted him with a bright smile. His gaze flicked down to Shouta's outfit, and he let out a small laugh. We're matching, he said, pointing to the hot pink sweatpants Shouta was wearing, a joke gift from Hisashi that he'd grown strangely fond of. Shouta felt his face heat up slightly, and he rubbed the back of his neck, feeling a little self-conscious. Yeah. Hisashi thought they'd be funny. Well, they definitely suit you, Izuku said with a soft giggle, stepping aside to let Shouta in. The warm, savory scent of homemade food hit Shouta the moment he stepped into the apartment, filling his senses with comfort. The small space was cozy, the table already set for two, and the smell of grilled fish wafted from the kitchen. Wow, Shouta murmured, taking it all in. It smells good. Izuku laughed, moving back toward the kitchen to check on the food. Just wanted to make something nice. You can hang out in the kitchen with me if you want, "I'd like the company," he says while walking towards the kitchen. There, a pan with fish was laid on the stove, and the hiss of the meat being grilled filled the space. Shouta followed Izuku, standing next to him but far away enough to not bother the other while he cooked. The hero leaned on the kitchen counter and watched Izuku cook. Some minutes later, Izuku plated the grilled fish over rice, walking back to the living room. He placed the plates on the table. Once they sat down to eat, Shouta took a bite and ummed in appreciation. "Your cooking is amazing," he said, his chopsticks quick to grab another bite. Izuku's cheeks flushed slightly at the compliment. "I'm glad you like it, Sho." Their conversation flowed effortlessly, light and playful. Shouta couldn't remember the last time he felt this at ease, a rare sense of peace settling over him. It was becoming a feeling he associated with Izuku warmth and comfort. When it came time for Shouta to leave, they lingered by the door. There was a tension between them, thick and unspoken. Izuku reached out, gently taking Shouta's hand in his. Shouta's heart raced as he raised his free hand, cupping Izuku's cheek. The younger man leaned into the touch, emerald eyes glazing and shining like the brightest stars in the sky. For a moment, time seemed to still. Then, Shouta leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to Izuku's cheek. Izuku's eyes sparkled, a shy giggle escaping his lips. "See you soon?" Izuku asked, his voice soft. "Yeah," Shouta replied, his chest warm with a mix of longing and contentment. "See you soon." And with that, they parted, though the quiet warmth of the moment lingered between them, holding the promise of something more. Later that night, Shouta found himself lounging on the worn leather couch in his apartment. The room was dimly lit, casting long shadows across the space as the flickering light of the TV illuminated the room. It was way past dinner and Eri had been tucked into bed hours ago. Hitoshi sat next to him, arms crossed and a bored expression on his face as they watched the show. It was some ridiculous dating program where contestants competed to win the affection of a so-called prince. Hitoshi snorted, his lips twitching upward. "I can't believe people watch this junk." Shouta grunted in response, though his eyes were glued to the screen. "It's good background noise." "Background noise?" Hitoshi raised an eyebrow, shooting his dad a sideways glance. "You've been watching this for an hour." Shouta shrugged, the corners of his mouth pulling into a rare, amused smile. "It's entertaining." Hitoshi snickered. "Entertaining, huh? I never took you for the hot mess TV type." Shouta sighed, knowing he wouldn't hear the end of it. Still, there was something oddly soothing about mindless television after a long day. As the show droned on, Shouta's mind began to drift, thinking back to the events of the afternoon. Izuku's laugh, the way his eyes sparkled when he smiled, Shouta felt his chest tighten at the memory. He'd been trying to ignore it for weeks, that slow, creeping warmth that bloomed every time they spent time together, but... "Hey, Dad," Hitoshi interrupted his thoughts, casually leaning back on the couch. His tone, though light, carried an undertone of curiosity. "I was wondering." Shouta tilted his head slightly toward Hitoshi. "What? How do you feel about Midoriya-sensei?" "You love him, right?" asked the teenager. Violet locks fell over his eyes, casting dark shadows under his eyes. The question hit Shouta like a train. He tensed slightly, eyes flicking from the TV to his son. He tried to brush it off, shifting on the couch as though the question didn't affect him as much as it did. "Yeah, I like him," Shouta replied simply, his voice nonchalant. Hitoshi shook his head, a sly grin playing on his lips. "No, you love him. You can't look at him the way you do and say you just like him." Shouta frowned, his brows furrowing as he glanced at Hitoshi. "Is there a difference, though?" Hitoshi raised his eyebrows as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Of course there's a difference. Love changes you. I mean, a few months ago, you would have told me that this was none of my business and shut down the conversation." Shouta crossed his arms, pondering Hitoshi's words. "I haven't changed that much." Hitoshi smirked. "Yeah, you have. You're more comfortable with your feelings now. That's what love does." "I don't know, dude, think about it." He stood up from the couch, stretching his arms over his head before grabbing his backpack from the floor. Shouta frowned, thick dark eyebrows knitting together. "I will. And I'm not dude, I'm your dad." Hitoshi chuckled on his way out. Right. I'm heading back to the dorms. See you tomorrow, Dad." "Good night." The door clicked shut, leaving Shouta alone in the quiet apartment. He settled back into the couch, still watching the ridiculous romance program playing on the TV. But Hitoshi's words gnawed at the edges of his mind, refusing to be ignored. As the show progressed, one of the contestants, a woman with big hair and an even bigger smile, confessed her love to the so-called prince. The dialogue was cheesy, filled with dramatic declarations about the power of love and how being with the prince made her feel alive. Shouta snorted, shaking his head at the over-the-top sentiment. "What nonsense," he muttered under his breath. But then, as the characters on screen shared a kiss, the words lingered in his mind. Love changes you. Hitoshi had said something like that earlier, hadn't he? He couldn't help but think back to the way Izuku had looked at him today, the way his laughter had made Shouta's chest feel warm and full. Izuku's smile was like sunlight breaking through a storm, casting warmth over every corner of Shouta's heart. And his laugh sent a rush of heat through Shouta's veins every time he heard it. He felt it now, that same warmth that bubbled up in his chest whenever Izuku was around, making his heart race and his palms sweat. That's what love does. The realization crept up on him slowly, like the first light of dawn inching over the horizon. He had been pushing the feeling down for weeks, never really wanting to actually think about his feelings. But now, sitting alone on his couch, watching a lame romance show on TV, Shouta couldn't deny it anymore. Oh! His breath caught in his throat, and his chest tightened as the truth settled over him like a heavy blanket. He loved Izuku. It wasn't some fleeting crush or idle affection, it was deep, rooted in every smile, every laugh, and every quiet moment they shared together. Shouta's hand unconsciously went to his chest, rubbing at the spot where his heart seemed to beat just a little faster. This wasn't a dumb teenage crush that made his heart race. I love him. The realization felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. What the hell was he supposed to do with this knowledge now? It wasn't like he could just walk up to Izuku and say it. No, things weren't that simple. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to hide from it anymore. He could coexist with the feeling now, accepting it as something real. His work bag hung heavily on his shoulder, but his smile didn't falter as he made his way back to his apartment. Izuku was in a really good mood today. The day had been long, but it was one of those satisfying days when everything seemed to fall into place. His students had made real progress, applying what they'd learned in their disaster zone training at the USJ arena. It was rewarding to see them react with such focus and precision, particularly when administering first aid. That was always one of the toughest areas to teach, getting future heroes to stop and assess injuries when their instincts screamed at them to jump headfirst into battle. As he walked through the school, the hallways were nearly silent, save for the soft echo of his footsteps. Once he reached the outside, the summer air was cool, a refreshing contrast to the warmth of the inside of the main building. The crispness of the evening breeze brushed past him. Izuku inhaled deeply, savoring the clean, fresh air. The sky was already darkening, though a few lingering streaks of pink and orange hinted at the sunset just gone. The familiar path to the teacher's dorm building gave him a sense of calm as he fell into a routine once again. He could hear the faint hum of the building's cooling system as he neared the entrance, and the cool air from the AC hit him the moment he stepped inside. The common area was dimly lit, casting soft shadows over the plush furniture. It smelled faintly of coffee and something sweet, possibly cookies that one of the teachers had baked earlier. Izuku's apartment was just down the hall once he exited the elevator, and as soon as he reached the door, the comforting scent of home greeted him. Finally inside, he let out a long breath, feeling the exhaustion settle in his bones. He kicked off his shoes and left his bag near the door before heading straight to his bedroom. The quiet space felt even warmer here, the soft golden light spilling in from his bedside lamp, casting a cozy glow over his neatly made bed. Without thinking twice, Izuku collapsed onto the mattress, sinking into the soft fabric of his sheets. His entire body seemed to relax at once, the tension in his muscles loosening as he melted into the bed. He took in the familiar scent that surrounded him, the light, airy blend of fresh flowers and cotton from his laundry detergent. His eyelids grew heavy almost instantly, and the soft, rhythmic sound of his breathing began to slow. He didn't fight the pull of sleep. The day had been long and fulfilling, but the weight of his tired limbs demanded rest. Izuku let himself drift, the warmth of his bed cradling him, pulling him deeper into a peaceful slumber. The warmth of the sun kissed his skin as he sat on the soft blanket, the bright rays filtering through the canopy of trees above him. The light was gentle, creating dappled patterns on the grass, while the cool shade kept the afternoon heat at bay. Birds chirped in the distance, their songs blending with the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze, and the world around him felt peaceful, unhurried. He was in a park, though Izuku didn't recognize this place. The flowers scattered across the grass bloomed with vivid colors, and a soft breeze moved through the trees, lifting strands of his curly hair away from his face. It was beautiful here. Tranquil. His heart felt light, a sensation he hadn't realized he'd missed until this very moment. Shouta sat beside him, looking more relaxed than Izuku had ever seen him. His usually tense shoulders were at ease, his eyes half-lidded as he leaned back against the tree, the barest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. His wavy black hair shifted slightly in the wind, and in the soft light of the afternoon, he looked peaceful. Not the stoic, ever-watchful hero Izuku was so used to seeing and loving, but simply a man, content in this quiet moment. The sight of it warmed Izuku's chest, and he couldn't help but smile in return. Nearby, Hitoshi was sitting on the blanket, holding a sandwich with both hands as he took a bite, a small giggle escaping him as he watched something in the distance. That giggle was so rare, so heartwarming. Hitoshi always had this stoic way of being, often mirroring Shouta's serious demeanor, but here, in this perfect moment, he looked genuinely happy. It made Izuku's heart swell with affection for both of them, two people who had come to mean so much to him over the past few months. Eri was running through the grass, her light blue hair bouncing as she twirled in circles. Her laughter rang through the air, bright and unrestrained, and Izuku watched her with soft eyes. She had so much energy, so much life, and her joy was contagious. Every now and then, she would stop and inspect the flowers that grew in little clusters around the park. She crouched down now, picking a few, her tiny hands gathering blooms of different colors. Shouta leaned back further, his head resting against the tree behind him, that small smile still playing on his lips. It was such a rare sight, but Izuku had started to see it more often these days, little moments where Shouta allowed himself to relax, where he let the weight he carried fall away, even if just for a short while. "Papa, Papa, here, I found a flower for you." Eri's voice rang out, her excitement drawing their attention as she ran over to them, her tiny feet kicking up tufts of grass as she hurried toward Shouta. She skidded to a stop in front of him, grinning from ear to ear as she proudly presented him with a bright yellow dandelion. Shouta took the flower from her with a soft chuckle, twirling it between his fingers as he glanced up at her. His smile deepened slightly, and he nodded toward her, a simple acknowledgement, but Izuku could see the fondness in his eyes. "Thank you, kiddo," Shouta said softly, his voice warmer than usual, though still gruff. Eri giggled again and darted away, her eyes sparkling as she continued her search. Next, she approached Hitoshi, who looked up from his sandwich with mild curiosity. "Here, Toshi," Eri said brightly, holding out a delicate purple wild geranium. Hitoshi blinked in surprise, but a soft smile tugged at his lips as he took the flower from her, giving her a nod of thanks. There was a flicker of something in his expression, something like affection, though Hitoshi wasn't one to show emotion so openly. Still, in this moment, surrounded by warmth and family, he seemed to let that guard down, just a little. And then, Eri turned her bright, beaming smile toward Izuku. His heart skipped a beat as she approached him, her small hands clutching a single white daisy. She came to a stop in front of him, her wide crimson eyes sparkling with happiness as she held the flower out to him. "Here, a flower for you, Dad," she said softly, the word so natural, so simple, but it hit Izuku like a tsunami. He felt the world tilt, his vision blurring as he stared at the little girl in front of him. The sound of birds and the breeze faded, replaced by the sudden, overwhelming rush of emotion that tightened his throat and burned in his chest. He reached out with trembling hands, taking the flower from Eri, but the moment his fingers closed around it, he felt the tears spill over his cheeks. He couldn't stop it, he didn't even try. A violent hiccup racked his chest, and he pulled Eri into his arms, hugging her close as the tears flowed freely. The softness of her little frame, the warmth of her in his arms, was too much. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair as sobs racked his body, overwhelmed by the weight of what she'd just called him. Dad. That was a word he never expected to hear being directed to him. Izuku had made peace with that fact long ago. His tears wet her hair, but Eri didn't seem to mind. She hugged him back with all the innocence and warmth of a child, patting his back softly as if she understood. Izuku held her as though he would never let go, as though this perfect, peaceful day could stretch on forever. And in that moment, under the bright sun, surrounded by the people he loved most, it truly felt like it could. In his bed, face buried in the soft sheets, Izuku cried. Fat tears fell from his closed eyes, dampening the fabric beneath him. The sounds of crying filled the apartment, along with the warmth of home and the smell of fresh flowers. Shouta let out a long, weary sigh as he made his way down the dimly lit hall. His body ached, every step heavy with exhaustion. His dry eyes stung when he blinked, the day's fatigue weighing down his limbs like lead. He reached up and rubbed at his tired eyes, feeling the grainy discomfort that had been plaguing him for hours. It had been one of those days where everything demanded his attention, a rescue mission gone slightly wrong, a grueling session at UA, and an impromptu meeting with Nizu about next week's curriculum changes. His scarf, which usually felt like an extension of his body, now felt suffocating as it hung loosely around his neck. But as much as the fatigue clawed at him, someone else softened the weight. Izuku. The thought of him brought an involuntary smile to Shouta's lips. He hated how he couldn't control it sometimes. How easily that smile would creep up whenever Izuku entered his mind. But Izuku had that effect on him. Shouta rubbed a hand over his face, trying to shake off the warmth that tugged at his chest. He wasn't used to this. To smiling so often. And yet, ever since Izuku came into his life, that smile had been happening more and more, even if it still felt foreign, as if it didn't quite belong to him. As Shouta reached the elevator, he leaned against the wall, his mind drifting. Izuku. That freckle-faced, green-haired ball of energy who had managed to wriggle his way into Shouda's heart without even trying. It wasn't just a fleeting crush or a momentary infatuation. No, this was deeper. More genuine. Shouta was in love with him. The realization had hit him hard not long ago. And ever since giving these feelings a new name, every time he was with Izuku felt like a beautiful bliss. He felt his heart swell, his breath catch in his throat, and before he knew it, the words were right there on the tip of his tongue, "I love you." But he couldn't say it. Not yet. They'd gone on a couple of dates since then, shared kisses that had sent shivers down his spine, and while they hadn't exactly put a label on their relationship, it was clear how much they loved each other. Shouta was no fool. He knew Izuku loved him too, that the feelings weren't one-sided. But admitting to himself that he was truly, deeply in love with Izuku? That was different. It scared him. Not the love itself, but the vulnerability that came with it. He was a man of control, always the one to keep his emotions in check, always steady and strong. But Izuku had a way of unraveling him, of making him feel raw, exposed in a way he hadn't been in years. Shouta shifted uncomfortably in the elevator, leaning his head back against the cold wall. He felt ready to confess God, he wanted to tell Izuku how much he loved him. But the nerves ate at him, a knot tightening in his stomach every time he thought about it. He wasn't sure why he was so anxious. Maybe it was because of everything he'd lost before, the fear of letting someone get too close only to lose them again. Still, when he thought of Izuku, their quiet moments together, the soft looks exchanged when they thought no one was watching, the way Izuku made him feel like the weight of the world wasn't quite as crushing, Shouta knew there was no going back. He couldn't push these feelings away, couldn't pretend they weren't there. Izuku was too important to him. Too precious. Shouta clenched his fist. He will tell him. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But soon. And when the moment was right, Shouta would look into Izuku's eyes and tell him the truth. Shouta slid the key into the lock and turned it with a soft click, feeling the weight of the day lift from his shoulders as he entered his apartment. The familiar scent of home, a mix of worn leather, faint lavender from Eri's room, and the ever-present musk of coffee greeted him. Before he could even shut the door behind him, he heard the patter of small feet. "Papa!" Eri's voice rang out, and she barreled toward him with all the enthusiasm her little body could muster. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and in her hand, she held a piece of paper. "Look what I made!" Shouta barely had time to brace himself before Eri collided into his legs, giggling up at him with that wide, innocent grin that never failed to soften his expression. He crouched down, gently resting his hand on her head, brushing a lock of white hair behind her ear. "What VE you got there?" Eri held the paper up high, her face glowing with pride. "I drew us," she announced, bouncing on her toes. Shouta took the drawing from her small hands, his gaze softening as he looked at it. There they were, Eri, Hitoshi, himself, and Izuku. All four of them stood together, stick figures with brightly colored clothes. But what drew his attention most was the way she'd drawn him and Izuku side by side, their hands clasped together, a bright red heart floating above their heads. The sight made Shouta pause. His breath caught, and something warm bloomed in his chest as he took in the vibrant green Eri had used for Izuku's eyes, the same color she always insisted on when drawing him. His own figure, black and gray, stood next to Izuku's, with a big smile on his face. He looked down at Eri, her wide eyes full of hope and excitement. "It's beautiful, kiddo," he said, his voice quiet but full of emotion. He reached out and ruffled her hair gently. "You did a great job." Eri beamed at the praise, her cheeks flushing with pride as she hugged him around the neck. "I wanted to draw us all together," she said, her voice muffled by his shoulder. "And I made you and Zu hold hands because you look so happy when you're with him." Shouta swallowed, feeling a lump in his throat. He pulled back slightly to look at her, eyes filled with something deeper than he could quite put into words. "Is that what you see?" he asked softly. Eri nodded, her smile unwavering. "You're happy with him, right?" Shouta couldn't help but smile. He looked back at the drawing, at the heart Eri had drawn between him and Izuku, and something in him shifted. The simple image in front of him reflected what he hadn't fully put into words yet, a longing, a desire to make their relationship more real. He stood, holding the drawing carefully in his hand as if it were something fragile and precious. "Thank you, Eri," he said quietly, his voice full of warmth. "This means a lot." As Eri skipped back to her room, Shouta lingered for a moment, staring at the drawing again. It wasn't just a child's doodle, it was a glimpse of a future he wanted. Before going to his bedroom, he passed through the kitchen, hanging the drawing in the fridge with a kitten magnet right in the center for everyone to see. The day was normal. Way too normal for Izuku's liking. It's been a little over 6 months since he started working at UA, and every day, every single one of them, had some type of adventure awaiting him. Not today, apparently. The kids behaved wonderfully, even Katsuki used his inside voice. The coffee machine worked well, and the coffee smelled delicious. His shift at the hospital had been good, and the petition he had sent for a 2-week vacation for summer break was approved, which was incredible. It was shaping up to be the most uneventful, ideal day he had experienced in months. And Izuku couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too good to be true. There had to be a catch. He busied himself by organizing files at his desk in the UA teacher's lounge, his eyes occasionally flicking to the clock on the wall. The minutes crawled by in this uncanny calm. His fingertips drummed against the papers, a subtle sign of the restlessness growing in his chest. That's when Hisashi popped into the lounge, his energy filling the space with his usual infectious enthusiasm. He was holding a stack of books under his arm, his eyes gleaming as he approached Izuku. "Yo, Izuku. Got a minute?" Hisashi chirped, placing the books on the table with a dramatic thud. Izuku smiled, turning his attention to his colleague. "Sure, what's up?" Hisashi grinned, tapping the top book with his finger. "I've been thinking about changing up the reading list for next semester. Maybe throw in some classic literature, something a bit more intense. What do you think? You told me you read a lot. Got any recommendations?" Izuku leaned back in his chair, pretending to focus on the conversation, but his mind still itched with the feeling that something was missing. As Hisashi rambled on, listing book titles and adding possible projects he could assign based on each book, Izuku nodded politely, offering a few vague suggestions. His thoughts wandered momentarily to Shouta. It was unlike of him to go without checking in, especially after a long shift. "Izuku? You still with me?" Hisashi waved his hand in front of Izuku's face. "Oh. Yeah, sorry, I was just thinking," Izuku stammered, straightening up. He smiled apologetically, but Hisashi chuckled and waved it off. "No worries, dude. I know how it is. Besides, I was going to pick the books at random, so you do not even need to consider what I am talking about. Catch you later." Hisashi grabbed his books and exited the room, leaving Izuku alone with his thoughts once more. As the hours dragged on, the normalcy continued to weigh on him like a storm cloud. He returned to his apartment after work, feeling oddly restless despite the quiet. His nerves were fraying at the edges, and he couldn't quite place why. The first thing he did was clean his apartment. Top to bottom. Maybe this will calm me down, he thought, scrubbing the floor with a little too much vigor. He dusted the shelves meticulously, making sure every surface gleamed. The smell of cleaning products lingered on his fingers. But even that didn't soothe the growing anxiety in his chest. He moved on to his bedroom, opening his dresser to reorganize his clothes. His scrubs had gotten a bit mixed up, so he took the time to color-code them again, hanging them in the wardrobe neatly. When that task was done, he moved on to the dresser, carefully sorting out his everyday clothes. When he was finally out of busywork, Izuku stood in his bedroom, feeling the quiet press in around him again. He sighed and grabbed a towel, deciding that maybe a long shower would help. He lingered under the hot water, letting the steam soothe his tense muscles. For once, he took his time, washing his hair carefully and scrubbing his skin until it felt raw but refreshed. His thoughts drifted to Shouta again, and he wondered if the man was still out on patrol or if he had made it back home. Stepping out of the shower, Izuku dried himself off and applied curl cream to his damp hair, massaging the product into his curls. Then he grabbed the vanilla-scented lotion he liked but rarely used, rubbing it onto his skin in slow, thoughtful movements. The scent lingered in the air, soft and comforting. He slipped into his dark blue plaid pajama pants and a black t-shirt, feeling a little more relaxed. His curls were still damp, and he let them air dry as he padded barefoot into the living room. It was late, but he wasn't quite tired enough for bed yet. He flopped onto the couch, pulling out his phone, intending to scroll through some mindless social media before calling it a night. But just as he was about to lose himself in the digital world, there was a knock at the door. Izuku blinked in surprise, glancing at the clock. It's nearly 11 p.m. Who would be knocking at this hour? His heart skipped a beat, a sudden rush of worry flooding through him. He immediately thought of Shouta. Throwing his phone aside, he rushed to the door and opened it. His breath caught in his throat at the sight before him. Shouta stood there, looking tired and slightly disheveled. His usual dark attire was rumpled, and his hand was pressed against his side. A small trickle of blood stained his slender fingers. "Shouta." Izuku's voice was sharp with concern. "What happened?" Shouta gave a small, weary smile. "Just a little mishap. Mind if I come in?" Izuku stepped aside quickly, ushering Shouta into the apartment. Without a second thought, Izuku guided him to the kitchen table. Sit up here, he instructed, pointing to the table itself rather than a chair. Shouta raised an eyebrow but obliged, hopping onto the table with a little difficulty. Izuku ran towards a cabinet and grabbed his medical kit from the cabinet, the practiced motions of his job kicking in as he prepared to treat Shouta's wound. Izuku, it's just a scratch, Shouta murmured, but his voice softened as Izuku approached. Shouta's attempt to downplay the injury didn't sit well with Izuku. His eyes narrowed in quiet disapproval as he pulled up a stool and opened the medical kit. It's never just a scratch with you, Izuku muttered, gently lifting the edge of Shouta's shirt to assess the damage. The sight of the deep gash made his heart drop. He bit back the frustration bubbling up. Yeah, I know, said the hero. He glanced down, looking at the top of Izuku's head. The sight of damp green curls comforted him. I'll need you to take off your shirt, please, murmured Izuku as he approached the medical kit. He laid a sterile drape over the table, preparing the materials he'll need. Shouta winced slightly as he took off his shirt. Izuku stood there for a moment, staring at Shouta. Soft, milky skin sat in front of him, hard muscle, tense due to years of fighting crime, stained with blood. Despite the gash across his abdomen, there was something in the way Shouta looked at him soft, tender. It wasn't the face of someone in pain. It was the face of someone at peace. Shouta settled again on the table with a grunt, waving a hand dismissively when Izuku tried to fuss over him. It's fine, Shouta muttered, though his voice wavered slightly. Izuku didn't buy it. He could see the small tremor in Shouta's fingers as he removed his shirt. The gash was worse than Shouta was letting on, and though he held himself casually, Izuku knew better. Shouta always tried to play down his injuries, but the blood soaking through his dark clothes told a different story. He wordlessly placed his hand on Shouta's forehead, activating his quirk. He smiled at the sight of Shouta visibly relaxing his muscles. Izuku quickly gathered his supplies, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. He carefully placed a sterile cloth under the wound, his heart pounding in his chest. As he began cleaning it, Shouta winced, but not from the pain. Izuku had already numbed the area with his quirk. He couldn't help but notice the way Shouta was watching him, his gaze following Izuku's every move. There was an intensity in Shouta's dark eyes, but it wasn't from discomfort. It felt affectionate. Oh, DMN, it's getting hard to keep himself from touching the other's skin. He just wanted to caress that skin and ease those hard muscles. He shook his head to regain his concentration. Izuku's hand slowed slightly as he tied off the first stitch. His fingers brushed against Shouta's skin just for a moment and he felt a blush creeping up his neck. He shook his head, trying to ignore the flutter of warmth in his chest. He couldn't get distracted by shirtless Shouta, he had a wound to assess. As he finished stitching the wound and started wrapping the bandages around Shouta's torso, the silence between them became heavier, more charged. Izuku's hands faltered slightly as their eyes met. Shouta's expression was so different from his usual stoic demeanor. His lips curved into a small, almost teasing smile. You're staring, Izuku. Izuku blinked, his face turning red. He fumbled with the bandages, his heart racing as he tried to focus on his task. But the warmth in Shouta's eyes, the way he was looking at him, it was overwhelming. Izuku, Shouta said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension. It's fine, you can stare. Izuku stilled, staring at Shouta's flushed face. He lifted a hand, gently touching the hero's forehead. Do you have a fever? He murmured, trying to mask his racing thoughts with practicality. You're acting strange. But Shouta didn't answer. Instead, he caught Izuku's hand as it moved to check his temperature again. The touch was firm but gentle, and when Izuku looked up, Shouta's face was closer than it had ever been a few minutes ago. Izuku's breath hitched as Shouta pulled his hand away from his forehead, holding it between his own for just a moment too long. His pulse pounded in his ears, and before he could speak, Shouta's hands moved cupping Izuku's cheeks. The world seemed to slow down as Shouta leaned in, his lips brushing against Izuku's in a kiss that was soft and deliberate. Izuku's eyes fluttered closed in surprise, his heart slamming in his chest as he melted into the kiss, feeling the warmth of Shouta's breath and the press of his hands against his skin. When they finally pulled apart, Izuku stared at Shouta, wide-eyed and speechless. His mind was a blur, trying to catch up to what just happened. Of course this wasn't their first kiss, but now it felt so changed. So intense. Shouta. Izuku started, his voice trembling, but Shouta silenced him with a thumb brushing gently across his cheek. He leaned into the touch, like a cat being pet. If he could purr, he'd be purring right now. I love you, Shouta whispered, the words soft but weighted with meaning. He spoke as though the words had been sitting on the tip of his tongue for a long time, waiting for the right moment to fall. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. His heart felt like it was about to burst. He searched Shouta's face for any hint of hesitation, but there was none. Only honesty, raw and vulnerable, in those dark eyes. Tears pricked the corners of Izuku's eyes, but not from sadness. It was joy pure, overwhelming joy. His lips wobbled into a bright, teary smile as he whispered, "I love you too." Shouta's smile widened just slightly, a rare expression of unguarded emotion, and he leaned forward to press their lips together once again. The two of them sat there for a long moment, the quiet of the room wrapping around them like a blanket. No words were needed. Everything had already been said.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.